hear myself through my headphones. Yes, man. Like, I feel real good about this right now.
Pay attention, because you are now listening to Permission to Speak Freely.
Where it goes.
Yeah, depending on where it goes, man. Hey, so for the listeners, we joined by Devin Fish, author of a book called Answering the Hard Questions. And just real quick, like like elevator pitch style, can you tell the audience what this book is about and why you decided to write it?
Yeah, so essentially what Answering the Hard Questions was, it's the very first hard question I had to ask myself was, do you want to die? You know, it's in the introduction of the book. It's on the back cover of the book. And then even if you look at the front cover of the book, you know, there's like an angel and a demon. And so it tells you know exactly what you're going to sign up for when you're reading this book. And to give like a little quick background, so I'm Devin Fish, come from Rockford, Illinois. So not a very good city. You know, it's rated 5 out of 100 on the crime index. So 95% in the United States is safer than Rockford, Illinois. I grew up in poverty. So I moved like 16 times before I joined the military at 18. At 19, like my mother died. At 18, my father was like in the hospital covered in blood due to like drug and alcohol addictions. 21, I got like blackmailed for about a year straight. And after I overcame all those obstacles, I was like, okay, maybe I have a story to tell. And then I started writing the book about 2 years after that.
Okay, so exactly to where I want to be at. First question is this, because you kind of encapsulated all the things that will break apart a little bit like later. But before we do that, in saying all of that, what was the hardest chapter for you to write?
Ooh, so if I went off emotions, it would be probably chapter 3, which was called Going to War with God. It talks about my early church struggle. And then I also confronted my mother's death in that chapter. Yeah. So that one was a big reconciliation because I had a lot of regret because towards the end of my mother's life, I kind of pushed her off to the side. I didn't really treat her so well. So that was kind of like an emotional chapter to write. As far as the hardest chapter to actually put down on paper, though, would be A Glimpse into Hell, where I kind of talk about getting blackmailed for a year. And I very hesitantly added that chapter to the book. And it took me about a year to actually put that chapter down and be completely open with the audience due to how like explicit it gets like into some of the details.
Yeah. Yeah. Like what made you, yeah, it's like a funny part in that, in the chapter where you talk about like, and we're going to get into it, but it was funny. Like you talk about going back to work and like actually having like chlamydia. And like, it's like, you got to piss a lot. And like one of the dudes at the job is joking about like, hey man, like he probably got like the clap or something. And you like, dude's like joking, like, damn, you keep pissing, you probably got the clap. And in your head, you like really, like, I really do have a fucking clap, right? So so that was a funny part in that book. I want to go back, like most people do when you start a podcast, right? Let's go back to 97, Rockford, Illinois, growing up in poverty. First thing is this, like, how did you know that you were in poverty? Like, what were like your telltales on that?
So I guess the telltales, you know, I don't remember if I added this to the book or not, but like I could tell like we were poor early on when I was comparing myself to like my friends. So like by the time I was in high school, you know, they had iPods, they had iPhones, they had computers, everything like that. And, you know, I was still roaming around with like a flip phone and a CD player. So I could already see that I was like a generation behind. Like I didn't have like a designated computer until I was probably like 16-ish when I was getting ready to graduate high school and I was living with my grandmother. And so, yeah, that was one of the signs. I also kind of got it, you know, because we were constantly moving around. I think at most I probably stayed in one location for 2 years, maybe 3 years. But even then, you know, it was still going back and forth. And then, you know, depending on the different locations. So there's some times where we didn't have AC. There's some times where we didn't have like hot water. And then for a while, we didn't even have like a toilet for like a couple weeks. And so there was definitely signs. And I was not like a dumb kid. So I can kind of like observe some of these things when I was like growing up. And I eventually like kind of put 2 and 2 together.
Did you have a childhood friend that was also a kid?
I would say like I had friends here and there. I never really had like any school friends until I really got into high school. Most of them were like on the outside and I would have like, you know, 2 or 3 here and there. But I was always different than most people, and I kind of like again figured that out at an early age, just kind of based on my background, stuff like that. I didn't get along with people. I was always kind of the quiet kid. I didn't really like the same subjects as everyone else, and I was kind of always doing my own thing.
Yeah.
But depending on the location, sometimes I had friends, sometimes I didn't, and that was just location dependent.
Yeah. Now, did you, because all kids do this, and I wonder like how you maneuver it here. Did you try to fit in ever?
I don't think so. I think I was always kind of like the shy kid, and I'm like, I don't really belong with these people. I think there was at times where I did, and I could find myself like becoming a bully with certain kids like around the block and stuff like that. But I think I was in such a state of like instability towards like I couldn't really establish like being normal if I'm like moving like every year or two.
Yeah, you never really got to plant your flag anywhere, right?
Yeah, I think that was a good thing though, because typically where I was from, like most of the people I grew up with, some of them are like in jail, some of them are dead, and some other things like that. So it was probably better for me to keep up myself.
Yeah, and now eventually we'll talk about like dating and like the pursuit of romance and stuff like that. When you were young, did you ever pursue romance or try to court a young lady or anything like that?
When I was younger, I would say I definitely never wanted to be alone. It was kind of one of those things that just kind of like happened, based on based on my upbringing and everything like that. I always wanted to be a part of a group, but I was just too shy. And it was like to the point where like, if I didn't know you, I wouldn't talk to you. So like once I got into the rhythm, like in middle school, I don't think I hardly talked to anyone, to include like some of the teachers, to where I'm like, if they called on me, I'm like, I'm just going to go mute mode and, I'll take the F, like when it comes to my school grades and stuff like that. So I definitely had the feelings. And I think one of the things that happened early on is like, once I got in the Army, I really wanted to be a part of like a family. I really wanted that partnership. And I think that one threw me kind of in some of those desperate chains I found myself in a couple of years down the road.
Did you have a crush back in like middle school and stuff like that? Did you ever have a crush?
Oh yeah, I was definitely like a normal kid. There was definitely women that I definitely liked. Would I ever go up to talk to them? Probably not.
Yeah, I had a crush right in high school, and like I never talked to her. And then like later in life, I told her, I'm like, hey, like I had a crush, and I talked to a bunch of other girls, but just this one young woman I never talked to. And I was like, did you know I had a crush on you? She was like, you should have talked to me. Like I had a crush on you too. I was like, oh man, like I messed up. But so no crush, no. So where did you, in these days, right? What group did you feel like you belonged to?
Ooh, I would say probably from like elementary to like middle school, I didn't really belong in like any of the groups. I was kind of like that outcast that no one really talked to. And I would occasionally get myself like into a group. But even when I was like, I went to Arisa Middle School, which is like a science like academy and stuff like that. Yeah. But we were in uniforms, and then we also were put in like different sections to where it's like I couldn't, choose where I got to sit with people. Essentially, I had to sit in one section of the people, and that kind of made things worse. When we got to high school, there's like no uniforms, so then I was like wearing my metal t-shirts, and then you find your group from there. Yeah, but elementary, middle school was not good for me.
Yeah, and then you're like 5'8", 120 pounds in high school, right? I know the pain. I was 5'7", and I was 112. I was also skipped though, so I was younger. I was like I was born in December and skipped, so I was like 2 years younger than everybody. Anyway, so it was like a reason why I was smaller than everybody. I wasn't like their age, but that's the thing too. Did you ever like deal with bullies?
So I wouldn't say I definitely had my bullies experience, but it wasn't like a constant thing. It was more of like occasionally if they wanted to mess with me. I was one of those kids that was like, if you picked on me though, I would kind of just let it happen. There's very few times where I actually did something in return, and which made me kind of one of those easy targets to where I'm like, okay, I'm just going to let them do whatever they want. But later down the road, that created a lot of anger issues. Yeah. They definitely picked up my name because my last name is Fish. So they would definitely like sing songs. They would make, the little fish lips at me, stuff like that. Middle school, we had some couple interactions where I had some like a tray of food thrown at me and stuff like that. I had teachers occasionally make fun of me, so that was a little rough. And then, but I wouldn't say nothing terrible, minus like, kids being kids and they're just mean.
Yeah. If you had to,
did you have any times where you like clap back or snap back on some people at any time? Or is it just always like, you know what, I'm just gonna let it ride? Was ever that one person that finally caught it, that pent up feeling that you had?
Not at school. It was, I talked about it very briefly when I was writing about it. There was, I guess there's 2 incidents. So there's only 2 times where I've ever gotten like in a fight. And the first one I think was in probably 2nd or 3rd grade. And it was actually because I was trying to break up a fight rather than join the fight. I remember I got like suspended for that one. And then the other one happened when I was in middle school. Yep, because I was still at the trailer park at the time. We were actually good friends, but he was like pushing it too much lately, to the point to where he like started calling me like a faggot. He started, saying other names to my mom and saying he was like having sex with her and stuff like that. And he would record this on like a DS. And then one day I like had enough because this was going for like a week straight. I'm like, all right, I had enough in the mouth. He was recording on the DS. So I essentially grabbed the DS to, try to get him to stop. What ended up happening is I ended up snapping in half when I grabbed it. And then he got all mad. So he took my flip phone. He then threw it in the trash. So I had to go in the dumpster, dive in the dumpster, look for that phone, get the phone back. And then once I came back across the street, there's like some construction work going across the street. And if you've ever seen like those poles with the flags in them, like the little wood poles with like the pink flags on them. Mm-hmm. I ended up taking that out of the ground and I walked up towards him. I'm like, he's like, what are you about to do with that? I'm about to hit you with this if you do anything else. He's like, no, you're not. And then like midway through the sentence, it already hit him. And he went to the hospital after that. And I think I nearly broke his hand. So that was the only time I ever went off on someone like really bad.
Yeah. What was the highlight of these years? Like if you could go back to one highlight, what would it be?
As in like military included or like childhood?
No, not yet. Just childhood. Before the summer of 2016, we're not there yet, right? So just a positive highlight.
Oof. That's definitely a hard one. I would say, even, we talked about the fighting and stuff like that when, with my friend, but he was still a friend and we interacted after that and we kind of got back, we were still friends. That time frame I did kind of like because I had a lot of friends. I was also kind of in like a weird spot then though, because, I was kind of getting like this bully attitude. But I would say I definitely enjoyed that time just because that was probably when I had the most friends. We were just being kids, playing sports, playing games, doing all kinds of stuff like that. So that might have been a good period. And then probably when I was like younger, probably like elementary level to where like, life didn't really hit me yet. And so I was kind of like just being a kid and, occasionally I still find some photos to where like I used to have like this really big cheesy smile, like from ear to ear. So those might've been some like good times where I didn't really think about the bullying and I was kind of like just being a kid. So those were probably some of the good times.
So were you cooking at an early age? Because I know at some point you wanted to be a chef. So were you cooking like out of like necessity or were you cooking because that was something you just wanted to do?
I would say cooking was just something I kind of like to do. And I think it might have had something to do with like just because my mom, she was a single mom for most of it. Well, I guess the early ages, probably in elementary, she was with my brother's father. So that was probably all the way up until like 5th grade. And then they kind of like split apart. And so she still had to work. She still went to nursing. She went to vet tech school for a while as well. And so I was pretty much independent. I think I kind of just like had to learn it on my own. And I started to like cook for myself. So that's probably where that came from. I kind of like enjoyed it as well. I didn't end up like pursuing it or anything, but occasionally I still will do stuff. But mainly now it's just me and an air fryer now.
Yeah. Well, what's your, like, if you really had to, like, if Devin Fish really had to put it down in the kitchen, like, what meal is that? What you making?
So, one of the meals I still make for people and that they always request it because the first time I made it, they're like, hey, you have to keep bringing this back, is like stuffed mushrooms. So I do like stuffed mushrooms, like cream cheese. I'll throw like some bacon bits in there and some other stuff. So that's like a small thing that I still do, but I only do it like for special occasions.
Yeah. And
I got a serious question too, man, about your cooking.
Yeah.
So on this show, we really got to get this out there. Your grits. Do you put sugar in grits, man?
I haven't been too much of a grits person. However, I just went to, where is this? I'm trying to think of the last place I went to. Fort Bragg. I went to Fort Bragg recently. They had a place that had shrimp and grits. I did do shrimp and grits. It was like, it had some like cheese on top of it. I was like, oh, this is amazing. I would 100% get this. So I'm probably more of a savory grits person if I were to go one side.
Yeah, man, I recognize that, man. I appreciate that because some people do weird stuff like put sugar in grits. Like, Damo's kind of fan of that. Would you put sugar on rice, by the way?
No.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks, man.
I've had maybe some form of like stickier sweet rice, but I'm more of a savory person. I'm not like, I try to stay away from the sugar, especially like energy drinks now that I'm out of like the military. That's a hard habit to break. But yeah, I've never been too much of a sugary person. I was always like the savory, like the meat. And if I do get into like the sugar area, I'm more of like a sour person.
Gotcha.
All right, let's get back to like a host that actually did some research for this episode.
I did.
So let's talk about. So you also wanted to be an archaeologist at at some point, right? Did that last? Because eventually you joined the army, and we're gonna get there in a second. I want to go to 2015 first, but did the archaeology like thing last long at all?
No, so pretty much the archaeology and cooking things, those were kind of just like kid things. I guess the cooking one is still remaining with me, and I would think about, doing it occasionally. I think the archaeology one was just like, I want to be an astronaut when I grow up type of thing, or like I want to be a president or like a doctor. I think it was one of those because that went, past pretty quickly. I think I did a project where I did dress up as an archaeologist once. But by my teen years, I kind of gave up like on the plan, and I was just going with emotions at that point.
So I know that you had an aunt in your life that was pretty pivotal when it came to like joining the army. Like I think she helped you like PT and get ready physically, right? And I also know you was inspired by that David Goggins book. Like I think me and Aaron probably read that too and liked it too. The Can't Hurt Me. But while you were growing up, two questions, right? While you were growing up, how did you view your parents, right? That's question one. But then question two is, who was the most pivotal like family member that you had? Was it that aunt?
I would say how I kind of viewed my parents when I was younger and when I was a teenager. I did not have a very good understanding of life. And so there was a lot of times where I would resent my parents. And that's, kind of one of those difficult things to admit, but it's like, I guess because my parents, they grew up in a very rough childhood. I know some of their stories, and I don't go into too much details because I don't want to, expose them or anything that they went through. But a lot of their struggles and their issues were kind of like passed down to me, and I kind of had to watch that. And so, especially, when my father was kind of moving around, and then I was without my mother, I was without my father. And I think part of it was kind of my aunts too, kind of like fed that mentality. It's like, oh, he's not supporting you. She's not supporting you. We're supporting you. So there was a lot of resentment growing up. And then as I became, more and more into the teenage years, and when I was getting closer to leave for the military, I would say it definitely got worse for a while, especially with like some of the altercations me and my father got into, and some of the altercations me and my mother got into.
Yeah. So, and moving around like 16 times, right? And moving around like that, you lived with different people too, huh?
Yes. Yeah. So I lived with my mother. she probably had me until I was around middle school. That's when it gets a little foggy. Going back and keeping track of like all these moves is pretty difficult. And like I have to actually sit down and write it down. And I even had to call my father. I'm like, does this sound right? I'm like, he's like, kind of looks right. And yeah, so I was with my mother for the most part. I was with 2 different aunts. I was with my grandparents. And then I was also with friends of my mother's as well. And then I went back and forth with my dad about 2 or 3 times as well for very short, very short periods.
And everybody lived in this same city, town in Illinois. Everybody lived there.
Yeah. So pretty much except for maybe one of them lived in Rockford. There was one time where I lived in Belvedere, which was one of my middle school moves. We stayed out there for like the summer. And then I ended up moving back to Rockford immediately after that summer. And then my dad, when I was in the teenager and when he was moving around, he was going in between different cities at that time. I think it was called like Moline, which was like an hour or 2 away. But even then, like he wanted me nowhere near that city. He didn't want me around his wife or anything like that, just because she kind of knew she was like a bad influence at the time and that he was going through a lot of things. So there's a lot of years where there's multiple times throughout my life where my father wanted me to live with him, but I think he knew he couldn't have me.
Yeah.
And so that created some issues.
Yeah, I think that's a dad thing, man. I think we try to protect the visual. And I think that's where like a lot of dads go wrong, because it's just my opinion. But I think because the things perpetuate, right? It's people on the other side of like our egos, right? Like just like us trying to like protect ourselves from like certain feelings, right? Because you know they got like that skit, that Saturday Night Live skit where like the kids call their dad, and like and no matter what they say, the dad talking about football, right? Like they like, hey, did you know, I just found out I had cancer, and the dad's like, did you see them Eagles? Like, and they like, hey dad, did you hear me? Like I'm behind on rent, man. The way that quarterback threw the like, I don't know if y'all saw that clip. It's kind of funny, but it's again like dads trying to protect their energy too, and like. I think it's harder for men to have like those hard conversations and to expose themselves in a way. And I think some of that is what we're about to get into now, right? Like I think is what, at this point now, I believe it's what, 2015? And a Friday night or whatever, you go into dad's apartment or your apartment that you staying in with dad at the time. And like, what happened on this Friday night?
Yeah. So it was, I think we're 1 year off. It was 2016 when this one happened.
Okay, so it was 2016. Okay.
Yeah, so 1 year off, still pretty close though. So what ended up happening, I was about a month away from graduating high school, and I was about another month from going to basic training. So pretty much right as I graduated high school, they shipped me like immediately after that. I think there may have been like 2 or 3 weeks, and that was about it. But yeah, so I was living with my dad at the time. This is probably the 2nd or 3rd time that I went to go stay with him. And I got off the bus, and the first thing I noticed in our apartment complex, there's about 20 or 30 people in this apartment complex with us. But, you know, based on kind of how the story was going, how my life was going, and based on, you know, his, we'll say like attitude at the time, I was like, there was about 10 police cars outside our apartment. And the first thing I noticed was like, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to have a very good day, am I? It was just kind of one of those immediate responses like, okay. And I think I even said, I'm like, what the hell did you do in my mind when I walked up to those police cars? And they immediately confirmed it. They're like, hey, we're not going to allow you in this apartment. We can't allow you to see what's going on right now. So we're going to have to escort you off the premises. So they took me to my aunt's, which was about 2 miles down the road. And then they filled her in with the details, and then she passed it on to me. So essentially they told us like, hey, his father is in the hospital. And then they're like, he resisted arrest. We had to tase him. We had to sedate him. And then we had to take him to the hospital. And that's kind of like all we need from there. So we go to the hospital. We get there. First thing we notice is like his arms are covered in scratches and blood. And then he's also pretty angsty at this time. So like immediately once he sees me and his family, he's like, he wants nothing a part of it. You know, he's trying to look off to the side. He doesn't want us to see him there or anything like that. And then, so he doesn't want to have a conversation with us. And so then the nurse and the doctor come and pulls aside. They're like, hey, so essentially what happened is he has Fireball, whiskey, and cocaine in his system. And so what happened was that he kind of was pumped full of adrenaline. And then, but we didn't know how bad it was until we actually went back to the apartment because I still had to go get my belongings or what was left of them. So we get to the apartment, we open the door, and the first thing my aunt says is like, if we didn't see my father in the hospital, we would have thought he was dead, because this entire apartment complex is covered in blood. So like the floors, the walls, the ceilings, everything's covered in and scattered with blood. And then everything in that apartment is destroyed. And I imagine the first thing he broke was probably like this glass table, which would make sense with all the cuts and scrapes and everything like that. But it wasn't, just the table. It was like TVs, it was laptops, it was like kitchen cabinets. It was like the refrigerator was like torn in half. And there's even like an AC vent, that was hooked into the wall, and somehow he threw it through the window. And that gives like people an idea of like how much adrenaline was going through the system, because those things weigh a lot. And to physically throw that through a window is like, I don't know how much strength that it would actually take to do that. And then really the only thing I had left at that point were like the clothes, because like everything was pretty much destroyed from that.
Yeah. Did he remember this moment? Like, does he remember this moment?
So when I was writing the book, he was like the second person I gave him a copy to. I'm like, hey, I'm going to give you a heads up. I'm going to be writing this book. I didn't include his name because he doesn't like being known by people like anyways. And, he's on his own journey doing his own thing right now.
Yeah. You got 6 years sober, right?
He does. What's that? Yeah, he's 6 years sober.
Yeah, yeah. Nice, good.
So he did do all that. He did end up recovering. I think we've had the conversation a couple times, but when he went back and he read the book recently, he's like, I didn't remember doing all this stuff. And he's like, and it makes him feel bad, because he has to sit there and he's like, oh man, I really did all this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. So he don't even remember that night, really. Like what made him go into like, outside of the drugs and the alcohol, like what made him actually like, what was the trigger? He don't even remember that.
So
right?
I think he remembers all of it, but it's like once you have to like sit down and read it and then kind of have to relive it, he's like, oh, I guess I really did mess up in some parts of your life. And so that's kind of a conversation we've had before. So I think he does remember it. He knew he had like drug and alcohol addictions for a very long time, because he's like, he was like heavily into the punk rock scene and to the metal scene and everything like that. And anytime he went to one of those, he wanted to drink. If he drinks, he wanted to do drugs. And so he kind of knew about it for a while. And then there's also a lot of stressful events that were going on when that was also happening. And I could, see this as a son that, when I was a teenager, like for about probably at least 4 years, like he was changing. He used to be the calmest person, but like, it got to the point where like every time I was with him, like he was exploding over something, whether it was like stress, whether it was, with his wife at the time, whether it was with me in like failing grades, or, with the other person he got with, and then they ended up leaving and doing a bunch of other stuff. And so I guess me leaving for the military, the person leaving him, and him going through all these other things, it kind of just like exploded one day. I don't know if he specifically remembers, what happened in the apartment. But he definitely knows, the stuff he did.
Do you feel like your parents were connected to who you were? Like, actually?
Like, do I see my parents, like, inside of me still?
No. Like, do you feel like they knew you? And, like, in your formative years, like, you feel like they knew you?
Oh. I don't think either one of them had an idea of what was kind of like going through my head at the time. I think they saw certain things because one of the big things my father was able to see is like, I don't want you becoming me, which was like why he was on me, why he wanted to try to get me to join the military, and why I think he wanted me to get away from Rockford. He wanted me to get away the lifestyle that he lived. And one of the things he always says to me, he's like, I'm really glad you didn't turn out to be like me. He's like, I don't know where you got it from. And I guess some of it, was from my mother and stuff like that. I think he saw some of it, but I think he saw enough to where it's like, he wanted me to get away from it.
Yeah. So a couple months later, or a month later or something like that, after the incident with Dad, you go to the Army, right? So you're 18, 2016, you go to the Army and you join to escape. You join to escape Rockford. You join to escape like just wherever life is right now. And you go in to be a nurse, right? Is that 69 Charlie or 68 Charlie?
68 Charlie. So
right. All right, so 68 Charlie. So you join to be a nurse, 68 Charlie. What made you want to be a nurse, first of all? What made you want to choose that MOS?
So I've always liked helping people, and I think it kind of goes back to one of those things where I didn't really like myself at this time, but when I helped other people, I kind of got like a sense of purpose. So I think I was trying to chase that dream. But the other part was one of the recruiters that I admired a lot. When we were doing like PT for the delayed entry program, he was also a 68 Charlie. So when the job came up, I was like, okay, let me try to follow in this guy's footsteps. So those were two different routes of what eventually led me there.
Yeah, and that's what Fort Leonard Wood, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and how's that experience for you?
So Fort Leonard Wood, the heat is on a scale of its own. I think I had an entire chapter dedicated to it, if I believe correctly. But it wasn't just Fort Leonard Wood. So Fort Leonard Wood, I guess to give people an estimate of like how bad the heat scale is, I was there. I got there in the middle of July, I believe, and then our basic training was on 3 different floors. We had 3 different platoons and everything like that. But when they opened the door on the first floor, we could feel the heat coming on the 3rd floor as soon as they opened the door. So that's how hot it was. It would just take over the entire building right away. And it even got to the point to where we couldn't always do corrective training like on the pavement because it would cause the soldiers to get like burns on their hand. And so they had to like do like half the cycle like indoors to where it's like we couldn't always do the things that we were supposed to do. And even the heat was within like the first day we had like a heat casualty going at like the obstacle course. And then he ended up getting kicked out of the military because it ended up giving him migraines. And so he couldn't even stay. And so he was staying on the bed for like 3 or 4 months, just waiting to be released. And he was bedridden. So they wouldn't let him leave the bed because, he's still in basic training. So yeah, he had it rough.
Dang, man. So you go there, you got like all the hope, and Aaron, jump in whenever you want, man. But you go in, you got all the hope in the world. Do they serve rice and no? I'm just joking. But so you got all the hope in the world to go be a nurse. You want to go do medical stuff. You want to go do your thing, and you fail a rifle qualification. How does that story go?
Yeah, so about 4 to 5 weeks in, it was about halfway through. I think it's white cycle is what they call it. So you get the rifle marksmanship. You have to shoot 24 out of 40 targets to pass. Yeah. I had 23, never hit the 24. So they're like, hey, we're going to recycle you. I was very discouraged at that time, because I just got in the military. This was kind of going to be my new start to life. And, I already messed it up. I already failed. But luckily, I think one of the things that kind of kept me going is the senior drill sergeant pulled me aside when he's like, hey, we didn't want to recycle you. So we actually wanted to keep you. We tried to look for a rifle marksmanship. He's like, wasn't going to happen to the calendar to where like a drill sergeant could take me like a second time to go.
Yeah.
But then he also said, he's like, I saw you on day 1. He's like, in my head, you were going to be the one that quits. Yeah. And he's like, because I was like awkward. I was like, you were like the smallest one. And he's like, here you are 4 to 5 weeks in here and you're still going. Yeah. He's like, you're going to do just fine. Because he knew I was going to be a nurse. He's like, you'll be fine. You're going to make it. So I ended up going to across the street, doing basic training again. I think I went into like red phase. They're still in red phase. And then went to do rifle marksmanship again. Ended up never failing out again. I think there's like only one time where I missed it, and it was because it was like raining out, and so I couldn't see like through the optics. I think that's the only other time I failed rifle marksmanship throughout my entire career. And yeah, so that ended up happening.
Yeah, and now how are between this time and the second time, how long are you at basic already? Like how long are you there for?
So, first run, I was probably there for like 4 or 5 weeks. I go back to red cycle, and then I'd say probably another 4 to 5 weeks again. So it's like I was halfway there, and it's kind of like going again.
Yeah. So you go back, halfway there. And then like what happened at Fort Sam Houston?
Yeah. So we ended up graduating, after the second time. I get to Fort Sam Houston. And the first thing that they tell us when day 1 in classroom, we're like, hey, you guys probably didn't know this, but this classroom is a 70% dropout rate. So like out of the 30 of you, about 3 of you are going to pass and the rest of you will fail and be thrown into other MOSs and or get kicked out.
Yeah.
Didn't know that when I signed a 6-year contract. And for those who don't know what happens when you fail, you are still obligated to continue that contract. And essentially what happens is the military gets to choose your next job based off needs of the Army. And that's how all Army contracts are worded. So about 4 or 5 weeks in the class, I was going through some stuff. I wasn't able to keep my head in the game. I fell behind in my classes and failed out probably, I think it was only 2 tests in. So I passed the first test and then I couldn't pass the second test. And so what ended up happening during then, I ended up getting put in a holdover status. And so I'm waiting for my next assignment, figuring out what the Army is going to do with me next, what job I'm going to do. And that was probably like another 2 or 3 months just sitting there waiting. And this is, Fort Sam Houston is also in Texas. So this is like midsummer. And then by the cycle, we were into the fall and then we also got into the winter by the time of me waiting. Yeah. So they would have us pretty much, we had this laundry room to where it was nice and heated. And they would let us stay in there because they felt bad for us because it was really cold outside during the winter because we would have to sit out there the entire time while they're going to school. And so this is probably like, 5 to 7 hours a day. We're just sitting out there doing nothing except going to eat and then waiting for people to come back so we can actually do stuff. And so the problem was that we had people that would fall asleep, guilty as charged. I was one of them. And then so anytime they caught us sleeping, they're like, all right, go outside now. And depending on which instructor we had, they would check us on us more regularly. And so pretty much most of the time we were like outside and, just trying to get by. And then eventually I get notified. They're like, hey, you're going to be a 19 Delta. I kind of chose it for myself at the same time because they're like, you can do this cardiovascular thing. And I was like, I'm not doing any more medical. They're like, you could do 92 golf, which is a cook. I'm like, I'm not doing a cook for the Army. I'm like, I've seen enough of that already. I'm like, that didn't look like cooking to me. And luckily I made the good decision because the cook hours are absolutely dreadful from what I hear from people in the military. I don't know if it's the same.
No, it's crazy. The Navy, breakfast, and then like all the way to dinner, and then the weekends, and then, it's crazy. Shout out to all the cooks.
So Dev, I just wanted to just jump back real quick. So you said you were done with medical, so you never had a desire to be a 68 whiskey as far as, like, you're not a nurse and they had no desire to be a medic maybe, or did they say if you're not a Charlie, then that's it? You're just free game for any MOS?
I think for me at the time, it was like, let me get away from this because this is my second time filling in the military already. So I was like, let's not go, 3 for 3. And so that was kind of my mindset. So I was like, all right, I've always been a quiet person. I've been a stealthy person. Let's figure out what being a scout is like.
Yeah.
Now, ended up not, being the thing for me. But I ended up going and they were definitely a lot more stricter when I went over there. But I did end up passing when I went over there. I guess it's pretty hard to fail over there too, because I don't think we had any holdovers. I think that was kind of one of those MOSs where they're just trying to push you into the big Army rather than wait for a bunch of people to pass like height and weight standards and all these other things. But 19 Delta training is also a combat MOS, and I talk about it in the book. And what that pretty much meant is like I had to go back to basic training for the 3rd time, and I had to pass basic training for twice. And they are also a lot more vicious, and they treat the people a lot worse down there because it is a combat MOS. So I also kind of got a new experience with that.
What's up?
I was gonna ask one more question. So between you and Goggins extended time. Buds and your time, who had more time in basic training between you and Goggins? You ever did that math?
So I haven't sat down and done the math. I do know he went like twice. I know because he went to Hell Week I think he went 3 times because I think on the 3rd time they're like, hey, you got to get it or you're out permanently.
They told him 3 times.
For my basic training, if you're like including all 3 cycles of basic training and my AIT, I was in that TRADOC environment for like about a year straight.
Yeah.
I think the only time I got like a little break was like Christmas when I was like in AIT, and then when I graduated, so I got like a week off when I graduated, like my first basic training.
Yeah. So outside of you already going to basic, outside of you going to basic because it's a combat MOS and it's already harder. I'm assuming they probably were like messing with you a little bit too because you've been here before as well, right? Was that ever like something they called you out about?
Oh, kind of like the holdover stereotype to where it's like, we don't like you people. That was absolutely a thing. So when I went there, there was 3 other people that were holdovers and that we already graduated basic training, and they absolutely hated those people because I think it was the mindset. They're like, okay, you think you've made it because you've passed basic training, so they're like, welcome back to round 2, and we're going to treat you even worse because now you're back here again.
Yeah.
So that's kind of their mindset, and then they also felt like those people were always entitled, so they also gave them special treatment.
Yeah.
And I think the other 2 people, like one of them was EOD and another one was like part of the welding, and another one might have been like a scuba diver. So these were all like, high MOS dropout rates. Mm-hmm. And then I think the other holdovers, they kind of got targeted more. I was able to blend in for the most part until the last couple weeks of this cycle, to where we took a PT test. I'm doing my sit-ups in front of the drill sergeant, and they're like, who are you? I've never seen you before. I'm like, I'm in your platoon, drill sergeant. And then, from there, it was kind of like game on. Because by this time, I've done this for about a year, so I was reasonably able to blend in with like the rest of the people. And I also didn't have like that holdover stereotype to where I'm like, I was kind of actually, a part of some of the groups.
Yeah. Now here's the thing, and we might be like blending stories a little bit, which I mean we'll break them down later. But you go in there and you go to be a scout, right? You go be a scout. You get out because you out now. You got out, and did you get out in like May?
Yes.
This year.
May 5th.
All right. So you got out in May. Book came out in March, people. So March 31st was the release day of the book. May 5th, you get out, and you get out as a career counselor, right? Mm-hmm. Now, just this one question, because I got a follow-up question, just one. How long were you in before you converted to career counselor?
So let's see. I joined in 2016, and then I became a career counselor at the end of 2022. So in my 6th year in. Yep.
Okay. Now, how do you go from... Yeah,
I was going to say, because I did, 1 year in basic training, and then I did 5 years as a scout, to clarify.
Okay, 1 year in basic training, 5 years as a scout. Now, how do you go? And if the work is kind of in the conversation about healing and all that stuff, we'll get to it. Because how do you go from being this person that kind of lives in isolation, more reclusive, to being a career counselor? Because in the Navy, career counselors, they dealing with sailors every day. You got you got somebody you talking to. It's not like you can't be stealthy anymore. Like you got somebody in there. You gotta be like, your social battery is going to get kind of drained. Like if you're an introvert, like I'm an introvert, right? So your social battery is going to get drained a little bit throughout the day. So how do you go from where you were, I'm stealthy, I could be a scout maybe, to like, I'm a career counselor. I see 20 soldiers a day and talk about career stuff. Like, how does that transition happen?
So a big push was that I absolutely hated being a scout. So I knew that I wanted nothing to do with like being a scout. It was a combat MOS, does not match my personality. I wanted to be a 68 Charlie. I wanted to help people. I didn't get any of that when I was a scout. And you also have to have that combat mindset. It's not me. I'm a calm person. I don't like yelling. I don't like PT or any of the other things that the scouts love to do. So it just was not for me. I could do it if I really wanted to get into it, but I think I also had that mentality of like, I was stuck in that basic training environment for like a year. So I also had that stereotype where I'm like, I'm not really like the military right now. And, as you said, it's a little ironic that, I hated the military and then I became an advocate for the Army for multiple years. And I encourage people to re-enlist and stay in. How that ended up happening is, and this, I guess it will fast forward a little bit, and I imagine we'll probably go back on it. When I went to the hospital, one of the things I kind of recognized was like, I didn't like the person I was anymore. And when I got out, I decided like, okay, what would make me happy? And so I started looking at other jobs, and I ended up going to the career counselor's office. Didn't know what a career counselor was at the time. So wrote down a list of jobs, came back the next day. We weren't really finding anything. And I was like, well, what do you do? He's like, well, I'm a career counselor. I do the soldiers contracts. I help you transition throughout your military career. And I'm like, okay, so this person gets to help people every day. And I kind of heard that. And I'm like, okay, I think I could do this. And so when I made that goal, I kind of also knew I had to change, and because I had to get recommendations from like seniors and everything like that. And one of the big things were like, hey, you need to talk more. You can't be this isolated person. You need to come out that shell. You need to kind of find that person, because, I was an isolated person, didn't like to talk to anyone, hated the Army. And then, so I had to create like an entirely new character when I became a career counselor. So I had to go up to people that I didn't know or hardly knew me, and I had to talk about an Army career. And before, I was in the hospital to the point where I hated the Army. And so now I had to do like this complete, 180 and become an advocate for the Army. I ended up loving the job. I still loved it. Did it for 3 years, even though I got out. And the only reason I got out was because I wrote this book, and I wanted to see where I can go with this book. I still, have contact with some of the career counselors and everything like that. So it was nothing like against the field or in the Army. It's just, I gave it 10 years. I hold like no resentment against the Army either. It's just, it was my time to move on and do other things.
Yeah. People don't have to do 20.
But with that skill set of you talking to people, right? How like recruiters, they go through a whole curriculum of how to talk to people, elevator pitches and all that. Was this all just you, OJT, self-imposed OJT, or did you have like a handbook for that MOS? Like, how'd you learn that skill set? Because that's like doing tradecraft, man. You're really learning how to arm people and talk them.
So, when we go to career counselor school, there are like a set of like, hey, this is how you're supposed to do it, because, right across the street, or all right across the hall. So we go to the same school as the Army recruiters. So pretty much, if I were to explain the job to someone on the outside, I'm like, I'm the recruiter for the soldiers that are already in the Army. That's what we do. And we try to keep people in the Army. I kind of threw out the book, when I got to my unit, I kind of did my own thing to where it's like, I never persuaded a soldier to sign the contract. I'm like, I called them. I'm like, hey, I'm your career counselor. This is what I do. Do you want to look at your options? Do you plan on getting out? All right. If you plan on getting out, well, what's your plan? And then go from there. So I never sold the Army to any soldier. And which is why, when people are like, hey, you're a career counselor, how's the advocate for the Army getting out? I'm like, I never sold the Army to anyone. Yeah. I literally like, hey, this is what you want to do. Here are your options. Yeah. So I never went with that particular skill set, and maybe, career counselors will get angry when I say that.
Yeah, I mean, again, a 20-year, like, you don't, like, a great career counselor, a good career counselor is somebody that puts somebody in the best position, like, possible for their career, no matter what decision it is that's set. In my opinion, Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, please. No matter what decision, no matter what.
So I was going to say, the wrong decision is the one that's not yours, that you don't own yourself. So you're saying you equip that person to make the decision for themselves.
Yeah. I think the other part for me, it was like, I'm not going to sell them something, because I also signed a 6-year contract to be a nurse, and I was never a nurse. Right. So there's also that mindset. I'm like, I know what happens when you get stuck in a job for 5 years that you absolutely hate. So I'm not going to be that guy that's like, all right, I'm going to convince you to do something else.
Yeah. So let's talk like pros and cons that the Army had on your life that you still see now. Like, what were some, well, not necessarily, I guess not cons now, because I know you've done like a lot of work, but what were some of the pros that the Army had just on you that still kind of, you could see it now, still shines through?
I think one of the best things the military does, and this is probably like all the different branches, is it forces you into positions you don't want to be in, and then you kind of have to see like how you're going to react. It's like, okay, I'm going to throw you in a desert for 30 days. You don't have showers, you don't have bathrooms. It's 100 degrees outside. How is this person going to react? And what that kind of like shows you, it's like what you're actually capable of doing. I talk about it a couple different times during the book. I talk about, like 12-mile ruck marches. I talk about, not having a bathroom or constantly moving around, all the issues that I went through. But everything kind of led up to me. Like eventually the Army like broke me down. It's like I couldn't juggle like everything with my past going on. I couldn't, handle, I was like a new NCO at the time. I didn't like my job. So all these things kind of like clashed together. And that's one thing I would say that's probably the biggest pro is like it put me in such a stressful position that I could no longer hide from it. And I had to confront those like feelings when I threw myself like in the hospital in 2019.
Yeah, the military got a way of filling your plate. Your plate be full, man. Yeah. So you go, you finally, it takes a year, but you finally, you get out of basic, and then you working in your rate, and like eventually it's gonna be like a crash and a breakdown. But before all that, like what's going on with you at work, and what's going on with you socially? Would you have considered yourself a good soldier? And then like the second part of that is like, how are you mixing in with other soldiers, and what are you doing outside of work?
So I guess one of the big things I kind of like noticed when I was, within the scout platoon, again, I didn't feel like I ever belonged in a particular group. So that was always kind of like on me. And that's kind of what my book is kind of like always against as well. It's like, we try to convince ourselves that we're alone, but it's like, really we're alone because we're not telling anyone what we're actually going through or how we actually feel, certain stuff like that. But I was always kind of the person, like I didn't really do anything with the platoon at all. I just kind of sat by myself. I was gaming with some other people who also didn't like the Army. So our explosive personalities would kind of like go together. And that's kind of, I think, part of the reason why I started like to resent the scout, just because, some of the people I was like around.
Feeding each other.
Yeah. And so that wasn't always bad, because, it gave me something to talk about. And it's like, okay, I'm not the only one that has these feelings. I'm not the only one that probably doesn't belong in this MOS. Yeah. And so that was probably like a good aspect on like the social. I think one of the hard parts was that I was always a good soldier. I just wasn't a good scout, in my opinion. Like I was not built to be a scout, like physically. I wasn't built for it mentally. And it's like, even, I talked about it briefly in the book, but, after I got done being a scout and I became a career counselor, I recently got my eyes done like 2 years ago, and they're like, hey, you don't have depth perception. So I was like, so I was never supposed to be a scout. They're like, yeah, you were never supposed to do that. The Army made a mistake. And so like, I can't see like half the things I'm trying to like shoot at or I'm trying to call out. And so there's even like a wild story. And I even called one of my old squad leaders, because he wanted me to be his gunner, and we were shooting his 50 cal. He's like, how do you not see this? I'm like, I don't see it. And so I wasn't hitting like any of the targets. We ended up failing. And that was like the first time any of his gunners were failing. So he was yelling at me in the entire night. And when I found out I didn't have depth perception, I'm like, hey, I just found out I didn't have depth perception. He's like, oh man, I feel so bad.
I'm thinking about MEPS too. Like, how did MEPS not catch that, or what was going on with that too?
Yeah.
So now you in the Army, you kind of find your own kind of group that you gaming with, right? Like gaming with and stuff like that. It's still not really part of like the in crowd, right? The in crowd, like the social kind of like locker room chat type stuff and all that. But at some point now, you get, and how many years into your career is it where you actually do have, because at some point you have a suicidal ideation, right? Where does, and I know that, I think you mentioned like just the recipe started back in high school, right? But when did all of this come to a head for you? Like, and when and how?
So it was about 3 years into my military career, like right around 3 years. So like the 1 year of basic training, the 1 year of being with the scouts, I went on a rotation with them. We also went to Fort Knox to do a cadet summer training program detail. And so by this time, I absolutely hate the Army. I don't like myself at this time. So I'm filled with like a lot of self-hatred. And then once we get back from that detail, that's when I get hooked on like the dating websites, everything like that. I get blackmailed several times throughout the year, and each one's getting worse and worse and worse. And every time I went back, it was like, okay, maybe this time it'll be different. Maybe this time it'll be different. Nothing changed. And so, I got myself caught in the worst possible scam you can get into, which is the age scam, where you start a conversation, they swap the ages. At this point, if you like take the time and really read the story, it's like, I had already got myself in a bunch of other messes to where it's like, I don't even care anymore. I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to keep letting them blackmail me. I'm going to give them whatever they want. And so I kept going with it. And then once they blackmailed me and I kind of like reflected, I'm like, okay, they're like, we know you're in the military. We're going to call the police, everything like this, that the person's in the hospital. They had all these different claims.
Yeah.
And then it was at that moment, it's like, okay, I don't really like my Army life. I don't really like my life. But it was kind of one of those moments to where like life flashes before your eyes and it's like, what did you just do? It's like, because if it went badly, I could have been labeled like a child predator. I could have been put in prison and jail and everything else like this. And so that was really what clicked. And then, on top of this, I already didn't like myself. And this was like the ultimate reason. And what gets us back to the question that I opened up with is like, do I want to die? And I was seriously contemplating that question. And, I talk about it very briefly. I'm like, I was almost kind of like looking for a reason to end my life. I was just waiting for like that one bad message, that one bad phone call, or the police to come to like end my life. And luckily I just, kind of played it out day by day. And then I was sneaking off to a military family life counselor because they couldn't write anything down. And I didn't even tell them what was going on. So no one knew about the blackmail. No one knew about my family history or what I was going through. I just told them like, I hate the Army and I hate being a scout.
Yeah.
And I eventually, worked up the courage to say, I'm like, I've been having suicidal ideations. Yeah. And then I knew like once I said that, then they would have to send me to the hospital. So that was kind of like, my cry for help.
Yeah, you said like a month in, right? A month into talking to the counselor is when you finally worked up enough courage to say that, right? But why'd you feel like you had to suffer in silence?
I think a lot of it, that's probably has to do with like, I'm a very individual person to where it's like, if you look back on the 16 moves, I kind of had to kind of like raise myself because, my parents weren't the best example. I was constantly moving, didn't have a whole lot of friends. So I think it was part of the thing that I was always trying to figure life out on myself and I was never willing to ask for help. I think the other part was that I didn't really feel like I belonged in the scout platoon. So I kind of like stood in that isolation and I'm like, I don't really have anyone to talk to. And then on top of that, like a lot of the things I was doing was like, it was very embarrassing and no one wants to talk about it. And I discovered that, when I started talking about some of these topics, when people started telling me like, okay, I've had these things happen to me as well, but no one wants to actually sit down there, write them and be vulnerable with people. And, I didn't want to do it either. And even when I submitted myself to hospital, I didn't actually sit down and confront these feelings for like another 5 to 6 years.
Yeah. Now,
depending on how you count.
Yeah. Now the crazy thing is, which I think is the teachable moment, is like when you actually did finally like talk to other people in the Army, they were like super supportive of everything that you were going through, right?
Yeah. So that was kind of one of those moments, like when I was writing the book. So as I was writing the book, we were getting ready to submit it. And then, the chief editor, he's like, came around, he's like, hey, you wrote a self-help book, but he's like, you didn't give them the reason to listen to you. Like none of these people know you yet. So they need to know the full story. And so that's when I added like 100 pages to the book within like the 10 days, like right before I locked it in. And that was when I included the chapter of like the events that was currently going on as well, where I talked about, I took all these events, I put them into a PowerPoint and then I started presenting it to people. And the first time I had to do it, in front of 200 or 300 people. So it wasn't like, I could do it to 1 or 2 people. It was like straight from the get-go. It's like, hey, you're going to do this in front of like 200-300 people.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about getting blackmailed. I'm talking about death. I'm talking about drug and alcohol addictions. And I'm talking about, all these things that no one ever wants to talk about. And then once I got done with it, they're like, hey, thank you for telling a story. And then there's other people who are like, I've also gone through similar circumstances. And, and that's when I wrote the quote in the book. I'm like, okay, so this is a story that everyone wants to hear, but no one wants to be the first one to tell it.
Yeah. Hey, shout out to Mark, your chief editor, who like that whole WIFM thing is the military. Like we talk about it, like you have to give WIFM, right? We do that on the podcast a lot too. You have to, like, who want to listen if they don't, know who you are? So I want to go.
I have one question though, but the self-help. So you mentioned Goggins, you write in the book. Is this you just reading, or did you foray into reading other self-help books as a template? Did they give you some? Did you read those yourself? Like, what was your journey with self-help books and that genre before you published your own work?
Yeah, so it was more of a process of figuring out as I was kind of like writing. So the reason I discovered like David Goggins, you'll see Jordan Peterson in there, you'll see Jim Rohn in there, is that when I was writing this book, I was also doing bodybuilding for about a year. And so that's kind of when I started hearing like these motivational speeches and stuff like that. And I would listen to more and more. And so, you know, I was listening to Can't Hurt Me when I was doing bodybuilding, when I was writing this book, you know, in the 90-degree desert. I'm like, oh, this guy sounds a lot like me. And I'm like, I was listening to some of the vulnerabilities he was saying. It's like, okay, you know, how do I do this, but how do I make it my own? And, you know, that was kind of what happened. And, you know, one of the parts that we took out of the book was that, you know, I used to have every subsection had a number to where you could trace it back to see, you know, like, okay, what was the order that I actually wrote this book into? Because the original order was like, you know, 1 to 100. And then I ended up, you know, reorganizing it into in like actual chapters so that it had like a structure. You know, Mark convinced me to take that part out of the book. You know, he was kind of right because it was very complicated, and, you know, people don't either, like, you don't want to overcomplicate it and throw too much at the reader.
Yeah.
But it was there. You could see definitely certain sections of David Goggins in there. You could see Jordan Peterson in there with like 12 Rules of Life and some of his other speeches. Like Complete Honesty, that was like an inspiration from Jordan Peterson, where I say, in truth, you will find redemption. So that kind of came from him. When I talk about failure, that was directly from Goggins, where he's like, I don't see failure. I see it as my first, second, and third attempt. And I took those first, second, third attempts, and I'm like, okay, what 3 questions can I ask myself? Or can I give to the audience that would help them? And so I'm taking all these things that I'm learning from these other people, and then I'm forming it into like my own essential guide. And so that's kind of how those came about.
Yeah. So let's talk, because one of the things that we didn't talk about was the social aspect of what's going on in the Army. Because in order to get to this, I call it the Tinder run, right? In order to get to this Tinder run, and I know it's like different dating apps. You said you went to like from Tinder to the lowest of like the low of dating apps, like the ones that you knew were like super predatory, that you knew were going to put viruses on your phone, or like you bring it up. But like before that, like what's going on in your world socially? Are you dating? Are you pursuing love or romance just out in the world?
So there was, and you know, that's kind of what got me stuck on the dating websites, is because I never found anyone. And so like when I'm starting these dating websites and stuff like that, I'm like 21, 22 at the time, haven't been on a single date. So I've been isolated. I'm looking at all these other people in the barracks with, you know, other people. They're having a good time and they have their partners. And I'm like, what is wrong with you to where like you can't get a single date, you can't get a single match? And the only people who want you are like the people who are scamming me and, you know, catfishing me. And, you know, so it started off with Tinder, and then like I kept getting more desperate, and like the more times I got rejected, I've been rejected probably by thousands of people by this point in multiple countries. And so, you know, I always thought it was me, and that's kind of where I kind of like really let go. And so I kept getting worse and worse. And like, you know, I would read the reviews. I'm like, oh, they're like, hey, 1-star review out of 5. They're like bots and scammers. I'm like, cool, I'll download it and you know, I'll give it my chance. And, you know, even when that didn't work, I even went to like some of the adult dating websites to where it's like, you know, a little screen, and then, you know, you get 20 little pop-ups and you already know you have the virus. So it became just more desperation, and like, I just couldn't stop myself at the time.
Yeah. And at some point you get, and like, you could correct my words if I'm wrong, but at some point you get like, matter of fact, I won't even say that wrong, but you get comfortable with being scammed because, and this is my thoughts here, because it's something happening. Like you're getting some kind of reaction, some kind of response, some kind of interaction. Am I wrong there?
No, you're 100% right. So because the second time in, and you know, there's a sequence to everything. You know, the first one was a catfish. The second one, you know, we're having a conversation. It looks like there's going to be a relationship. They don't show up, but they have like explicit pictures of me. And so when I stop sending them the money, that's when they blackmail me.
Yeah.
And then the one after that, we started a conversation right away. Within 30 seconds, they're like, I sent them a picture. And one thing I'll warn people about, if anyone gets onto the dating websites, if you get into some of these like really bad realms, I knew it was off because they're like, hey, I want a picture with your face with an explicit photo. Yeah. I'm like, sure, I'll give it to them anyways.
So
as soon as I gave them that
question, like, why were you so quick on the draw with the hammer pick? What made you so quick on a draw with like, okay, let's go. Hey, for the listeners, it was an edit, something happened, but we coming back in. Hammer pick is like the explicit photo of your manhood. Like, it seems like Devin is sending this out within the first chat exchange. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm just asking them why. Like, why was it? Because you kind of know after the first time that, like, nah, I don't want to do this. Or you might be reluctant. What made you so, like, open to being like, snap, send?
So I think it was by this time. So the first one, it was like a gradual thing. And then with this kind of like second one, it was like, okay, for restarting. I think by the third one, this is already months into the story. By the time we hit to this third one that was out of nowhere, it was that I had already gone through all the normal dating app sites, and now I was specifically on like more sexual websites to where that's what they were actually looking for.
Okay.
And so when I think probably when I snapped that picture, and this was probably the most predatory one that actually happened when it comes to the dating scams, the blackmail and everything like that, is that the reason they wanted my photo was because they already had my Facebook ready to go. So that as soon as I sent that photo, they're like, hey, we have your mother, we have your father, we have your family, we have everyone. So like, now you're going to send us money. Otherwise, we're going to continue to blackmail me.
Yeah. And it's funny because I don't know how I would, like, NCIS, they come and they talk about that and all that. And my thought is always like, yo, you gonna have to send it. Like, just gonna have to see the hammer. Mom's just gonna have to, hey, son, like, hey, Moms, you done seen me for X amount of years, man. That's what's happening, man.
That is on me right there.
So that was actually my response later once we get into once I get past all the dating websites and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to say CID, we're going to threaten you back. We're going to see what happens and roll with it.
Yeah. So at some point, one of your scammers, right? Because I think it was 7 times you've been scammed, right?
I say 7 just to ballpark it because I don't have all the receipts or anything like that because this happened back in 2019. So all the messages are deleted, everything like that. So I kind of I knew it was at least several times. Yeah. It might have been from the same person or different people. But it was just a generalization.
Yeah. And so at one point though, and that makes me think about them building profiles, these people that blackmail and scam, building profiles and you at that time of your life fitting a profile that they built, right? And that's what makes them, who is this person, right? But at one point, one of the people who blackmailed you or scammed you helped you with another scammer, right? That's super interesting, right? And that was by them telling you hey, delete the app and download it again or something, right?
Yeah. So the first one that scammed me, the one that was more of the casual conversation with the explicit photos later, that was going on back and forth. And when I stopped giving them money, that's when they blackmailed me. They left me alone for a couple months. That's when I got into the third time, where I got blackmailed. And then that person ended up coming back. And this was probably a real person, but they're maybe a catfish or they're in a really bad situation, bad contracts or whatever, they were into. And they're like, hey, so they're not actually going to do it. They're just trying to take advantage of you and trying to get as much money before, you actually, fire back. And so they're like, delete your profile, ghost it for a while, block the number. They're like, you'll be fine. They won't mess with you anymore. Now, the reason they did that is because they wanted the money instead. So,
yeah. So now, are you looking for romance at this time? Because it's something that I want to get into, but are you looking for romance at this time or are you just looking for sex?
So it was more of I wanted love, and that's why I started, with Tinder and everything like that. And so when I didn't get that, I think it turned into a struggle of lust, to where it's okay, now I'm just going to go for whoever talks to me and see where it goes from there. and hopefully, you know, that something comes out of it. It was just like I had been alone, you know, my entire life when it comes to, you know, and then constantly being in the military, I have to watch all these other people going on dates, having fun, everything like that. So it was love, and then it just eventually, it's like when everyone rejected me, then I'm like, okay, I'll just look for lust because it seems to be like the easier solution.
Yeah. Now this could be like old, right? From like 10 years before that. Was Backpage still like a thing at this time or no?
Say that one more time. What was it?
I guess not. Like Backpage.
Backpage.
No, I guess not. It's like Craigslist, but just a different version of Craigslist where they would, like, people would have ads for like pretty much prostitution. But I guess that wasn't a thing at this point.
So I actually heard someone got into that. It was one of the people I used to talk to and used to game with. So he actually ended up getting caught up in one of those situations, and then the platoon ended up helping him out. So I knew about it, but I don't think I never got into that realm.
Yeah, or like massage parlors. I never went to a parlor either, right? You kind of... Yeah. So but at some point you do, I guess you meet a prostitute on a dating app, and you have an exchange, right? You actually go, well, you have more than one exchange, right?
Yeah.
And what was that experience?
So, earlier in the episode, so we talk, I talk about that. And at this point, I think in this part of the story, what am I, 24? And this is still the same to where I'm like, I haven't gone on a single date. And, this is the only real person. So I'm like, I'm just going to do whatever at this point. I really didn't care for life. I was just kind of like going through the motions. I'm like, maybe this will give me what I'm looking for. Yeah. So I ended up going. Sadly, that was, I talk about I say it a little bit, but eventually that's how I lose my virginity. And then, this goes back to the story that we were talking about earlier, where this is how I ended up catching chlamydia. So like, this is my first experience, haven't even been on a date, haven't actually found love or anything like that. It's just, really, it's just like going through the motions and trying to feel something at this point. It's like anything. And so, I don't even, what was kind of like going through my mind at the time. I think it was just like, this is the only person that's going to talk to me. So I don't even know if it was for the feelings. It might have just been, just because that person's actually like engaging with me. And, it's giving me something, some form of like love and I even talked to the person, I'm like, why do you do this? They're like, I'm just making a living. And so it was almost like humanizing to, be with someone and having that conversation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, were you like just the experience, like, were you nervous, like on your way there? Were you worried about anything? Like just the first time, like did she come to you? Did you go to her? Like, how did that play out?
No. So I went to them. I think I'm trying to remember what time frame this was. And I can't remember if I had a vehicle or not at the time. No, I did not have a vehicle at the time. So I actually Ubered over there, and it was like at a gas station. I went to like a gas station to withdraw the money. And then I ended up going to their place, which was like in a sketchy neighborhood. It's all like blacked out. And then there's even like, the little black gate like in front of the door. And then I even, I set the scene in the book to where it's like, I was definitely nervous at the time when I was doing it. And I just kept like going through the motions. And, it gets more like explicit to where I'm like, I imagine they did this to make sure like I wasn't a police or something, but they had me stripped down like before I did anything. Yeah. And then from there, everything happens.
Yeah. Was it just like the sex worker, or did they have like a pimp or something?
No, she was like independent. So she was like just doing this just to like get more money for her family and stuff like that.
Yeah. Now, and again, this was breaking your virginity. So, like, how did it, like, not necessarily experience, like, not in the bed experience, but just, were you satisfied when this was over?
I suppose like some part of me found like satisfaction because I like went more than once. Yeah. It was because I did, a second time. Again, no one, I don't like I don't condone my actions, definitely, because it still like wasn't the right thing to do. But it's, part of my history. So I'm not going to like run from my history. I'm going to like confront it and try to like understand all these feelings. So if anyone else has to, confront the same story or anything like that. I think strictly the only reason that stopped me from going was that is when I got chlamydia. When, it was after the second time. So I don't think I got it the first time. I think it was from the second time.
Yeah.
And then, because it was the same person. And then, I had all the bathroom issues to where it's like the next morning, we made the joke earlier about the section sergeant. Like, oh, you've been sleeping with the wrong people. And, he's laughing it off. And, in my mind, I'm like, well, maybe he's right.
Yeah.
And that's when I go to the bathroom, I start peeing out like blood and mucus. I'm like, okay, maybe he's right. And, I was hoping like it was a kidney stone or something like that. But, then I'm like, hey, I have to go to the doctor. So went to the doctor and, they examined me. I think they get like a little Q-tip. Another embarrassing experience because, you have to pull everything down. You have to give them a sample, everything like that.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, you probably have an STD. So I didn't even know it was like chlamydia at first. And so it's like, and then, originally, they asked me, they're like, hey, do you have this person's like POC information? We need to call them and stuff like that. And I was like, I don't know the person. I'm like random encounter because I was just, embarrassed from like that situation and like getting hemmed up for what would actually come from that situation. And then that was the last time I went. So, that was one of the hard lessons to learn, even though, shortly after I still didn't learn because I got myself blackmailed again for doing more stupid stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And you got blackmailed several other times, which led to the suicidal ideation, which I really want us to talk about. Before we go there, though, my question for you today is like, what do you want from a romantic partner today?
So, I talked about it a little bit in a book to where I kind of like found something and then that kind of like fell away, turned into toxic. Since then I've been single for like 4 years. A couple months ago, I got back onto the dating websites. I saw myself getting a little desperate. And essentially, what happened, it was like, no, this was like literally like 2 months ago. I got on the dating website and they tried to do the age scam on me again. And luckily, this was like my third or fourth time. They're like, all right, I know this is a scam. I know exactly what you're doing. Like, get away from me.
It's like Tom Cruise in that movie where like everything keep happening. Okay, I'm gonna pass this dude on the right. You gonna do this? You asked me for this? I've been through this a million times.
So I was able to recognize those signs, and this was actually on like a Christian dating website to where it's like, I'm like, and in my mind, I'm like, do these people have like my information? Am I like in their like logbooks or something like that to where they can track me down anytime I go onto like a dating website? And then every time that kind of happens, I'm like, well, I'm good for another like year or two of being single. When it comes to like love in general, I've kind of like over the last couple months, that's kind of something I worked with is like getting rid of like the cycle of lust, like in general, because I recognized it came like early from like my childhood. It wasn't just, all this blackmailing and the dating websites. There's a long history before that. Which is why I'm like working on like a second book. It's going to take a little bit longer than the first one. But if I were to do it, it would have to be like the right person. And I'm not really like in that desperate, chase anymore to where it's like, I'm looking for something very, one of the things I'm working on right now is faith. So it would have to be someone who is based like also in their faith. And is like on the same direction in life, not just like someone random on the internet anymore. And I don't think I would, date anyone like online anymore. I think it would have to be like in a in-person encounter, just based on like all my experience.
Yeah. What was the best example in your, sorry, Aaron, was just another quick one. What was the best example in your life of a loving relationship between two romantic partners?
I mean, so if you kind of like look back on my life, my dad and my mother were like separated ever since I was pretty much born. My father told me like after the book came out, he's like, hey, we were together for like a little while, but it's like way before you were going to remember it. The problem was that I didn't really have any models of like, okay, this is like the perfect couple or anything like that. I guess you could say like, one of my aunts or uncles who have been together for 20 years, but like when I was growing up, I didn't really see him too often. Yeah. Or if, I saw, I guess, one of my aunts and uncles frequently when they were trying to take me to church, but by that time I was like very anti-religious. So I wanted like nothing to do with anyone at that point. Yeah. And so I don't think I was like I don't think I had like a particular role model for love. And so it was just kind of one of those things where I was just trying to figure out on my own again, which got me in all the trouble.
Yeah. Aaron, I saw you had, I was about to say.
Yeah, so you're talking about relationships, but the value of interpersonal friendships. Because I know you said that you're more introverted, you're more of a loner type. But even the loner types, usually in the military, we usually find like our tribe, our group. Whether it's one person with shared interest. I remember you talked about the t-shirt as far as the metal shirt and everything. In the military, did you ever have that tribe? And then, we're a different person when we get out the military. So what kind of friendships are you having right now as far as value relationships in that aspect of companionship with good people in your tribe?
Yeah. So I was saying when I was going through those times, those were kind of like some of the people I was like gaming with at the time. Yeah. I try not to game too much anymore because I realized that was like another big distraction. It was another big addiction that I try to eventually get away from. Like I'll do it like occasionally, but most of the time I try to stay away from that stuff. Now, typically what my friendship comes from is like I've been working on my faith a lot. So it's been like people I've been talking to with like at church, some of the people at the congregation, to where it's like, okay, they're looking for some of the stuff I'm looking for. But I'm still very much that introvert. It's just I'm happier. Like if I'm alone, I am happy. If I'm with someone, I can be happy. So it's like I don't really, depend on, talking to a bunch of people, but I can if I need to or if I want to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I've talked to folks, you question myself, right? It's like, all right, there's being alone and being lonely. And a lot of times whenever we're doing our own self-work, right, and navigating our faith, sometimes there are certain things you only get through clarity by being by yourself and being alone. But if you have those people like your aunt or those one or two people, then you're able to talk to them. But there's certain things that you learn. I think we all do, whether you're introverted or not. You learn and you have a better appreciation for being alone with your thoughts and your own endeavors rather than always feeling you have to be with someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, that was, answering the hard questions when I wrote that book. I did like 99% of that alone. The only time like someone was able to see it is like when I wanted feedback. And so I know we brought it up at the beginning, when the aunt that helped me with like the PT. So she was actually the person that got to see the very first like draft of answering the hard questions when it was all still like really bad, unedited and everything like that. And she even made the remarks. She's like, hey, you're too close to David Goggins. You got to branch off and do your own thing. Yeah. And, eventually, slowly I started giving it to other people. Like I gave it to one of my people I still, occasionally talk to him because he was like a PAO. So he did like stories and he was always like interested. And so, he actually got the first copy of the book because I was like, hey, first copy of the book to the first fan and stuff like that. And so I do try to look for, those like one or two people to where it's like, no matter what the conversation is, you can always, have someone to talk to. Yeah. But again, I think especially, that we need to be okay with being alone and not just relying on someone because like, if that someone goes away, then you're just going to completely fall apart. And so it's like, if I get it, I get it. If not, then, I could probably at this point live like a celebrant life if I wanted to really go down that path.
Yeah. So now as we work our way into the ideation, right? And we talked about the AIDS scam being like the launch pad for it, right? That was like the last trigger. And we started talking about your youth. We started talking about dad and this incident that happened like right before you go to basic. Then we talk about going to basic, not getting the MOS that you want, getting another MOS, being isolated, these dating things, which, again, leads to that scam. There's one thing that we didn't talk about yet that I think also played a pivotal role in like your life and like the way you felt in this moment. And I read a book a while ago. It was the biography of Tupac, the most recently released one. And she was talking about how many times he got shot and like the way his body was affected by him being shot. Because Tupac, he didn't die until he was in a hospital. And he was there for a little bit, like people came to visit him. But the doctor explained to Afeni, like, hey, if he lives, he's gonna live like this, right? And Afeni, with her strong self, was like, no, my son is not gonna be living if he lives like this. So I always from that, like that story, but just any other story, like I have a soft spot in my heart for people who have to make a decision to let a loved one go, right? And you had to make a decision to let a loved one go as well. And again, and we talk about parents and children, right? You had to make a decision to let a loved one go. And like, how did that go for you?
Yeah. So to rewind a little bit, so when I got out of my third cycle of basic training, so I guess, I did like a little recap to where the incident with my father, I've moved 16 times going back and forth with him. I went to basic training for a year, failed like 3 or 4 times. And then on my way heading to my first unit, I get a phone call from my mother. It was nothing extreme. She just wanted to see how I was doing. She's like, hey, how's the new base? How are you settling in? And this was about 2 or 3 weeks from my birthday. And then she's like, so she also wanted to wish me a happy birthday. It was about a 5 or 10 minute conversation. We, said, hey, I love you, goodbye, everything like that. Because at this point, I think we are in like, I guess, neutral standings. Because I know I talked about, pushing her off to the side a little bit. But she also had, her own issues because she also had that, drug and alcohol addiction to where she was on pain medication. And that's why I was avoiding her for a very long time because, I'd talk about it very briefly. I'm like, there's a circumstance to where she was like on the drugs and stuff like that. We're having a conversation and it pretty much zombified her to where her body was there, but her mind was like completely gone. We're having a conversation. She's sitting up. She's actually standing and, we're talking to each other. And then all of a sudden her head starts bobbing down to like her chest and she just pretty much sits still. And I walk outside the room and she's pretty much blacked out because of these drugs at this point. And, that was when I started avoiding my mother. And then, once I went to basic training, she had actually got her life back on track. So, she was living badly. She got off the drugs from what I could tell. She got a job. She was getting paid again. And so she completely turned her life around when, I went to basic training. And I think the thought behind that was like, okay, he's leaving. I need to clean myself up. Otherwise, he's never going to return. And I think my dad kind of did that same thing as well to where he got his life on track once he saw me doing something with my life in the military. But yeah, so we're having this conversation. Again, nothing extreme. I get a phone call the next morning from my aunt / Red Cross. And they're like, hey, you need to come back to Illinois. Your mother's not doing well. Yeah. So I get there and they explain like, hey, she's on her medication. She had a bad reaction with the medication and it essentially fried her brain from the inside out. And it was like one of these very unpredictable circumstances. And then I'm also the eldest son. So within 5 minutes of me being at the hospital, my aunt pulls me out to the side. They're like, hey, you're going to have to be the one that determines whether she gets to live or that you're going to pull the plug. Yeah. And, so I'm making that decision and, I decide to let her go for religious reasons because she was always religious. So I'm like, hey, if it's her time, it's her time. And so I didn't take that decision away from my mother. I just, did what I thought she would want me to do. Yeah. And so right as I'm making that decision, nurse walks in. They're like, hey, there's nothing we can do whether you want to keep her alive or not. And so, after 1 year basic training, headed to my first unit, 2 or 3 weeks before my birthday, I just sit there and watch my mother die.
Yeah. 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 That's, I don't know.
My mother, I'm the only child from my mom. And like my mother, she was a nurse. So she told me from a young age, if her health turned for a certain way, maybe she saw too much being a head nurse on the floor. She's like, hey, if I'm going to fight something, I'm going to fight on my own. And it was time for me to go home, to go to Lord take me. So I had to make that decision for my mother. And yeah, I think you just said it. It's like, do you do right by their wishes, or do you selfishly as a child or as a spouse, hey, I want them here, maybe they can fight this? I think that that's a decision that I wrestled for about maybe 2 days. Yeah. For you, is it something that you were very resolute, or did you have to really wrestle with that while you made that decision in honoring your mother's wishes?
I want to say it was almost like it was in an instant kind of decision. When I was talking to my aunt, and it was kind of like weird because at this time, like, I'm atheist, I'm pretty anti-religious, I'm pretty like anti-Christ. And, so when I made that decision, it was kind of like almost like I wasn't the one making that decision, but it was like, okay, I know my mother loves this, so I'm going to do what I believe she would want me to do. And it was the same with my aunt, because my aunt was the church we used to go to. And so that was, essentially they pastored her. And so I made that decision, based, on what I knew about them and stuff like that.
Yeah. So
if I have one more question though, man. Just you're talking about your father and your mother, by looking at them, going through your life, and then searching your memories and your feelings and writing this book, how do you view your parents as an adult, having lived some life, versus as a child and then as a young person?
So as a child, I love my parents. I always looked at my dad. I'm like, okay, I have the cool dad. As I grew up and as I started to learn, I'm like, okay, I'm not in a very good situation. And then, even in my teen years, I'm like, okay, I even had that hero mentality on my dad still before he started getting into some of like his more stressful years, where it's like, okay, he's the cool dad. I go with him on the weekends. I always look forward to being with him, hiking, gaming, just doing father-son stuff. And I would say at an earlier age, I started to resent my mother a little more, I think because I was around her. And then based on, how I was living. So I had a little more resentment for her at an early age. And then as I got in my teenage years, that's when I kind of grew that resentment towards my father a little bit. Just because I started, seeing all these stresses and him outlashing, whether it's at other people or me. And so I didn't really want to be around him for that time frame. And then, that was something we just actually talked about on my last trip back to Rockford, right before I left the military. He's like, I kind of feel like you don't really talk to me. He's like, you kind of like avoid some of these conversations. And he's like, it doesn't appear like you're always yourself when you come back. And, and so we sat down and had that conversation a month or two ago. And I'm like, and this is like after the healing and everything like that. And I'm like, I kind of like acknowledged, I'm like, I don't think we don't always know what to talk about because we're so very different from each other, just looking at the childhood and what we do and stuff like that. So it's like, sometimes it's hard for me to bond with my father because of that. And because, he's, I'm going more the religious route too. And he's always kind of been like atheist, and so he's kind of, trying to figure out his own things. But we acknowledge that like when I go to Rockford, like, and it didn't happen this last time, but the years before, I never looked forward to going back to Rockford because I would always think about, the old bad memories. I would think about, the disassembled family and everything like that. And so before I would get to Rockford and before I would, stay with him for a couple of days, I would build up this resentment to where it's like, I don't want to be here. And that kind of came off to him. How I view my parents now, and I think this is one of the bigger things I can admit, is that I know that at one point they were kids with situations that were equally or more messed up than me. And so now I see that like they just had, a different situation than me. And so I'm like, I was a kid at one point, they were a kid at one point. And so, sometimes, life gets the better of us. And so I don't hold any of these stories against my father. I don't hold any of them against my mother. And, I accept that they had a rough life and, I had to see that as a consequence. But, when they went through that, that was kind of my inspiration. It's like, okay, I know where I come from, so I can either do my own thing and, and try to do something better. which ended up, inspiring my dad. He's been 6 years sober. He's very proud of what I did. And so that kind of gave, him a foot back in the game as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, thanks for, just even sharing that story about your mom. So all of these things come together, right? Everything comes together. Everything comes down to this this age scam, right? So this age scam happens. Now you're seeing a counselor. Within a month, you tell the counselor that you had a suicidal ideation, or you were thinking about committing suicide. Well, not let me. I've learned something. You like death by suicide. I learned that language, and we'll talk about that language in a second. So looking back, though, did you have an actual plan?
So I would say I didn't go as far as having a plan. It was just like thinking about like ways I would do it.
And like what did your thoughts sound like just in this period of your life? Was like the voice in your head, and not as far as like mental or behavioral health, just like the literal voice that we all have in our head. Was it like super negative all the time?
I would say mine was definitely very bad. Because one of the things I admitted in my book is like I hated who I was. And that was a very honest thing for me to admit. It's like, I didn't like who I was as a person at all. And, that's kind of what I guess led me down into some of those desperate situations of me trying to change. And that's kind of what everything, accumulated to. It's like, I went to basic training. I kept trying to change. The mother died. I'm a brand new NCO. I'm trying to do this dating, and I'm trying to do all these other things, and nothing was working. So I kind of put a lot of that blame on myself. I'm like, maybe it's just you. Maybe it's not your father. Maybe it's not the army. Maybe it's none of these other circumstances. Maybe you're just a bad person, and this is the reason. It's you. And then, so yeah, I had a lot of self-hatred. I would say I still, I'm a lot more, I guess, graceful to myself now.
Yeah. But
there was definitely a period to where I look back and I'm like, nope, I still hate that person.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that too. Well, we'll get there too. I was going to ask you about.
Yeah.
So, looking back, right? No, not even there yet. So you have this ideation. I'm assuming you get like, like you go through like an intensive outpatient program or something like that.
Yeah, so they ended up taking me over to the hospital, and I can't remember if I put this story in the house and the thing though. But on my way to the hospital, I actually got escorted by one of my NCOs, and on the way with the conversation, he's like, "Hey, I've been here too." And then when I went to the hospital, even there's one person that I in particular wasn't getting along with, and his face was like absolutely devastated, like to see me in the hospital. He's like, I never knew that you were going through some of these things. He ended up getting out of the military a while ago as well. And he's calmed down since then. And I think we all kind of like look at this period and like, okay, maybe we weren't all doing good, and we made it that like the platoon when we already end, there's a lot of toxic things going on. And so that was kind of like putting us against each other.
Yeah.
I forgot what the question was. Oh yeah, the part about the hospital. Yeah, I don't write too much about the hospital trip itself because I actually, it was actually a very good visit in my opinion, and it was very relieving because the first thing they do is like, hey, we're going to take your phone. No one's going to contact you. You're not going to contact anyone. Now you get to write some numbers down just in case you did want to talk to people. But the beautiful thing about that is like, because I was getting overwhelmed with all these things that were going on, it's like, it was almost like a freeing moment to where it's like, okay, I don't have to worry about all the soldiers. I don't have to worry about the blackmail. I don't have to worry about the suicidal ideations. And, one of the weird parts, you actually have to sign like a document that says like, hey, you're not going to commit suicide or attempt to commit suicide once you agree to this program, or otherwise you'll get like UCMJ. So that's one of the weird things that was always kind of fascinating. But the big thing that happened at that hospital was I ended up reading 2 little pamphlets. It wasn't the counseling that really helped me or, the programming itself or the medication or anything like that. It was 2 pamphlets. And the first one was that, a lot of suicidal people don't want to end their life, as much as a contradiction as it sounds.
Yeah.
it's a cry for help. It's like, they're like, I'm in a situation to where I don't see an out. And I think when people don't see an out to their story or their situation, that's when someone ends up taking their life. And I think that's where we see me at the story is like, I took it day by day, but I was looking for a reason to kill myself. I was, waiting to get to that situation where I no longer had that out. And then the other part was that you could have a perfectly healthy mind, but if you believe you are depressed, then your brain will make you depressed. And so I took that. I'm like, okay, I know I hate myself. I know I'm depressed. I know I have all these issues. And then I reversed it. I'm like, what if I could convince myself I would be happy? And, that's kind of what I really started to pursue when I got out of the hospital. That really changed my outlook in life.
Yeah, you talk about creating a new character, right? And I want to get in that. But one of the things I do want to talk about, Aaron, I'm not sure if you ever had this conversation or heard it, but I've always said committed suicide, right? It's been language where like a lot of conversation is death by suicide and not committed, because committed like makes the person who passed by suicide kind of look like a criminal, like committed a crime. Whereas death by suicide it could be a mental health factor, or some people might consider it a disease, or it's people that consider different things. Have you heard any of that, Aaron, before?
I have, and like you, that was added to my language, my vocabulary, my thought process in recent years, to the same points you said, as far as committing an act versus a person is suffering or navigating, it's like a health challenge.
Yeah.
Versus committing a crime onto yourself. It's a cry for help. And so answer the question, yes. Recently, yeah.
I would say I also agree with it, and I kind of have to calm myself down when I kind of think about the subject, just because I wrote so much about it. But one of the things you didn't get to see in the book, because it happened after the book was made. So about 3 or 4 weeks before the book came out, I actually had one of our people in the platoon actually commit suicide right before this book actually got published.
Yeah.
And I talked to some of the other people in the platoon, and we're like, they were talking to him, and they're like, he was doing pretty good. And just one day he just snaps, and it was out of nowhere. So it's even. And, I thought about it. I'm like, was there anything I could have done? And I was like, maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. And I try not to dwell on that thought. But I also, even during that time, I'm like, what if I would have came out with this book a couple weeks sooner? And so those are always tough topics to actually deal with. And so I would say it is kind of more of a disease, and it's it's a lie that we tell ourselves. And that's, one of the things I encourage people to do is actually, you're not really alone. Everyone's going through these situations. It's just, we need to be more open with them.
Yeah. And what advice would you give a loved one supporting someone that's dealing with that disease?
So that's kind of the subtitle of the book, towards let it be the end of the chapter, not the end of the book. And one of the things that I love about that specific quote, and why it's the chapter one, it's the title of the book, and it's also at one of the endings of the book, towards the part about thinking about committing suicide. It's there are a lot of unforeseen consequences. It's it doesn't just affect you, but it affects everyone who has to read your story. So when you end your life soon, you're taking the hope away from someone else who had to sit down and actually read your story. And that's really why I wrote this book. And it's because if someone reads my story and they look at all these situations, they look at the 16 moves, they look at the poverty, me going back and forth to 7 different schools, they see the blackmail, they see all these circumstances. And let's say they're going through one of those, but they're like, okay, if this guy went through everything that he wrote about in this book, maybe I can too. And, and that's what this book is all about.
Yeah. Now, these 2 pamphlets, they eventually lead you to start looking at different things and creating a new character. For yourself. What was the first thing that you had to get rid of in this process?
So the first thing I kind of had to do was I kind of had to focus on being a positive person. And when I got out of the hospital, this was the only question I actually sat down and wrote to myself, in the actual book. I was like, what would make me happy again? And that was what actually led me to the career counselor's office. I'm like, okay, let me try to change my job and stuff like that. And so that was the one that actually really turned it around, is because I used the goal of becoming a career counselor to create a new character. Because I'm like, okay, I don't talk to anyone. I'm not a happy person. I don't like the army. So I literally flipped everything, kind of what I read in that pamphlet. And that's essentially what I had to do, is like, okay, I had to silence like the lies that I was telling myself. And then I had to, create that new character and the person who I wanted to be. And that's what I focused on for about, 2 or 3 years. I focused on that one goal. And anytime I went back to that negative mindset, or when I went back to the self-hatred, I kind of told myself, I'm like, hey, in a year, you're going to be a career counselor, or like you're going to get accepted to the course. And then when I, got the career counselor course, I'm like, okay, you're going to pass this course. Once I passed the course, I'm like, okay, I just turned my life around by making that one goal. And I'm like, now I have a story to tell. And then, eventually 3 years down the road, I end up writing it.
Yeah. So you literally pulled yourself out of the hole.
Question I had, you talking about your mindset, and as Don was asking a question about you making that persona of that new person, right? I don't know if you've ever heard Beyonce. She has her alter ego. Was it Sasha Fierce? Have you heard about that?
I think I've heard about it.
Introvert. Yeah, she's introvert, like creative, but then when she's in an element, she performs, right? But by you talking about how you think, you ever read the book As a Man Thinketh by James Allen?
Ooh, is that the World War II book?
Maybe maybe he wrote his World War II. I'm not sure.
That might be Man's Search for Meaning. As a Man Thinketh. It's really short. It's a really short book, right?
It's real short.
Yes,
yeah, right.
I think I briefly read it because it's like an hour. It was like an hour long. So I think, I have listened to an audiobook.
Yeah, it's a quick burn. But you talking about that, Dom asked me a question. I thought about the quote that I wrote from that. I'm paraphrasing, but it's to the effect of, a man's mind's like a garden. So whatever you plant, right, you cultivate good crops. But if you leave your mind to the whims, it's going to be like a garden. Weeds will take root and you won't have good crops, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty much like, as you think, so shall you be. So by you saying, hey, I'm going to be this career counselor, you are now a writer. I think how we think, it really manifests in our physical body, our physical person.
Yeah, it's like you gave yourself something. Like you did that. Like you made career counselor the thing. Like, hey, I'm gonna make this the thing, and this is what I'm gonna strive for. Because you could have looked at it like you looked at everything else, but you like that's where like I call like discipline and like self-control. I call them like the God qualities. Because I feel like the closer you, like, if you can master those things, the closer you can get to like that part of it, right? Which kind of leads me into like two things in life here, right? Faith and writing this book. Because to my knowledge, you writing this book while deployed to Kuwait.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
And then at some point while writing this book, your faith, even if you don't know it yet, but at some point your faith is growing too, right?
Yeah. So, one of the things that, and that's why, even when I finished this book, I went to go back and thank Mark, because I wouldn't have wrote the sections down for the memoir. And when I start contemplating my faith, and, I tell people, when I wrote the book, I wasn't a Christian, but by the end of the book, I pretty much convinced myself that it was real. And that's kind of what I think it was in chapter 7 or 8, where I'm like, the person who hated God, wrote the word faith in this book 100 times. And I'm like, I just opened the Bible. And the reason I put that in there was because I found my faith by the time I finished the book. And I actually just got baptized like 2 or 3 days ago.
Oh, man, congrats.
So that is like a full circle. And that's what, kind of the next book is going to be about. But one of the connections I kind of saw is like, the more optimistic I became, the more faith I found. And so, I've been talking about this with my priest a couple times, and we've talked about it to where, I'm sure I tried to figure out like, why did it take me so long to come to this faith and everything. And he was talking about a C.S. Lewis quote about a Christmas special. And C.S. Lewis was talking about like, it's easier to convert like a pagan to Christianity over an atheist, because the atheist doesn't believe in anything at all. And that's, I think, what took me so long is like, I almost had to, you have to change the person before you can even introduce like the concept of God. And because it's like, if you told me anything about God, I absolutely hated it. And like, you would lose my attention span right away. And so like, I had to, kind of figure out me. And then that's kind of when faith brought it back together. And, we talked a little bit about earlier, but it was a section called Going to War with God, where, I talk about my early church struggle, and then I reunited with my mother's death because, 6 years later after her death, I looked at her journal, I looked at her life, and I'm like, okay, she had a miserable life, but she loved God. And, one of the things that this quote, what she said to me always stuck with me to this day. And I think this is what brought me back to the faith. Is like when I was young and I was very anti-religious, I was wearing the Antichrist shirts, to church at this point. And she's like, God has already promised that you are going to come back to me. And I think that was one of the things that brought me back to the faith, because it never left my mind, even after her death. Or like anytime I thought about her, that's the one thing I thought about. And so that kind of, planted a seed in my brain. And then, when I was constructing this book, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to believe, why would I believe, or how would I make sense of this book? And, one of the things I thought about, it's like, okay, I typed into ChatGPT. I'm like, what are the odds of me coming out of this situation? And it was like 10 to 20% to make it out of this situation. And, and I think about that. I'm like, okay, well, maybe this wasn't luck, and maybe this wasn't a coincidence. Maybe there's just like something else going into play. And so when I started writing the memoir section and I started confronting those feelings, I'm like, okay, so what if God threw me in the darkness so that one day I would be able to seek the light? What if he threw me in all these situations so that I can then tell the story for other people and give them hope and then bring them back to faith? Yep. And then one of the other concepts that I learned when I was on deployment, because no one ever told me and sat me down. It's like, we think Jesus is God. I only heard Jesus and I heard some things, but no one ever told me that Jesus was God. And when I learned that at deployment, that changed my mind, because I was like, okay, so you're telling me, this guy came down, lived the perfect life, suffered, even though he was God and could have done anything else, but he chose to suffer to become one of us, and then said, I'm going to die for you, who hasn't even been born yet. And I was like, okay, that is something that I can believe in, and that's something I could die for. And that was the last thing that I think sold me back, that sold me Christianity, was that concept of, if God's going to suffer, then why should we not?
Yeah, I feel like, in your whole journey, like you said it, I'm just reiterating, you were being built for something, right? You were being structured for something. Even like going through basic 3 different times, like if anybody was built for it, it was you, right? Like 16 different like houses, like all of that, like you were being built for that. What's the significance of John 3:21?
So I guess you're doing deep research then, because there's not a whole lot of people who know about that one. So John 3:21 was the verse that actually brought me back to my faith 100%, to where, I opened the Bible. I didn't know what I was looking for. I'm like, okay, God, show me that you're real. I just need something. And so one day I was randomly scrolling through, because I was looking at the footnotes, and it said something about John 3:16. So I looked at that. I was like, okay, this is the verse that everyone's talking about, the only begotten Son and everything like that. And then so I continued to read on to it, and I got to John 3:21, which is, for those who do what is true will come to the light, and that their deeds can see that they were worked through God. And so I read that, and then I looked at, complete honesty, and I looked at the quote that I wrote that said, in truth, you will find redemption. And I connected those 2 verses. I'm like, okay, so while I was writing this book, before I was even a Christian, God already knew that I was going to write this quote and that I was going to find this verse so that I could come back to the faith. And so the book was almost like a prerequisite of what was actually going to happen to me very soon.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the book, right? And we got a little bit more to talk about. I think we're having a good time here. So for a lot of heavy topics for the listeners, but I think we digging into them the right way. So you go to write this book. Book is called Answering the Hard Questions. And I want to talk a little technically. Like Aaron I want to write a book one of these days. Aaron also writes, or in that realm. You want to write a book, bro? I'm not sure. You want to? You consider
for me?
Yeah,
I do eventually want to write a book. I like historical fiction. And then, I read comics and also sharing think pieces. So I do want to write even got a book recommendation for Devin as we've been talking. I think.
So you want to write like Lincoln the Vampire Slayer type joint?
All the above, man. Like yeah, your favorite writers, man. Like Ta-Nehisi Coates. He's written about politics. He's written about his experiences as a father. He's written comics. So a good writer could just have the wide spectrum, man. You know.
Okay. All right. So first question, Devin, is like when you wrote, because you fully committed to writing a book for real, right? The cover looks thought out. The book is available in digital. It's available in paperback. What made you say, oh, you also got a media team, you also got a chief editor, you went like the full route in making this book? Was it advice from your aunt? Was it like, if you say, I'm going to do it all the way? Like, what made you go this full route versus like the independent, like publishing and just putting it on Amazon?
Yeah. So, it was kind of like one of those big things that I kind of like noticed in my life is like, every time I made like a major goal, it worked out like really well. So like, when I, made the group goal of becoming a career counselor, which, took 2 or 3 years, had some defaults. I had some setbacks when I was doing that.
Yeah.
But then I saw the outcome of it. I'm like, okay, that was good. I did bodybuilding for a year. That turned out really well. And then, when I was doing bodybuilding and I really was into like the motivational speeches and listening to all the compilations, and I would listen to that for like 2 or 3 hours a day. And then I was like, okay, I went to go, it wasn't a book originally. So originally it was a PowerPoint. And then the PowerPoint ended up getting rejected. It wasn't what they were looking for at the time. And so then I got notified I was going on to Kuwait because I originally wasn't going to go to Kuwait. Originally I was going to be like the rear D person that takes care of all the soldiers in the rear. And then while I was on that deployment, I'm like, okay, they didn't want the PowerPoint. Like, cool. I'm going to now go, I'm going to make it a book and I'm going to go tell my story.
Yeah.
And so about 10 pages into that story, I wrote the end of the story, which is like the ending of the book. And I wrote it. It was about 10 pages into the book. And then I'm like, okay, this is going to be the concept of the entire book. And I'm like, I'm going to write this book. And then on top of that, I'm like, I'm going to leave the army to force me to write this book. And, I'm a man of my word. I got out like 2 months ago after writing this book without, having any sense of like, if this book's going to make money, if people are going to like this book. I'm like, I'm going to get out the army. I made it like a year. I made it like a year before I got out and let everyone know. And I, continued on with that path. So it was one of those disciplines that I'm like, I'm going to do this whether, people like it or not. How the actual self-publishing came around was a couple different ways. So I originally started on Reetsy. I got it edited by a person named, I think it's Andrew Woodard. And the reason I found him on Etsy was that I saw that he had previously edited a book of David Goggins. It was one of his other books. I can't remember off the top of my head.
So I think
it was his second one.
Can't Hurt Me is the second book.
It was the one before that then, maybe.
I thought Can't Hurt Me was the first book.
He had like 2 of them.
Never Enough is the second book.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the one. Yeah, so that was the one he worked on. And so, I gave it to him. He worked on it. I ended up paying for him for like some of the edits and like some of the feedback and everything like that. And then I thought the book was finished. It ended up not being finished because I ended up adding 100 pages to it. And then I got someone to work on the cover design. So I got all that done, individually, by these like individual people doing it. And then I was like, okay, so I can either go one of 2 directions from here. I can either go traditional route or I can go the self-publishing route.
Yeah.
So at first I'm like, okay, let me submit it to like a traditional, see if this is like a story they want to hear, something like that. They ended up taking a while to get back to me. So ironically, after the book came out, then they came back and they're like, hey, not interested. So it took them like 5 or 6 months just to respond to me. And so luckily I made a decision. I'm like, I was getting antsy and I wanted to, continue to work on this book and complete it. And so I looked up David Goggins' Can't Hurt Me Again. I'm like, well, who did he go through? And so then I found it was a self-publishing. And then I found the company that did the self-publishing, which was Scribe Media. And so I went through them, gave them the material, and then I started working with them. So they're the ones that help, make the cover. They're the ones that help do the edits. And then they're the ones that encourage me to add, that memoir of the 100 pages to the book.
So just ballpark it. You ain't got to get too exact. Like, what were the costs? Like, what were you? And I'm sure like half of our listeners probably want to write books too, right? Like, how much did it cost going into it? Like,
so the first thing I'm going to say is like, if you want to write a book, write the book and then look into it, because once I tell you guys the price, it's going to scare 90% of people away unless you have like some additional income. So altogether, I probably invested about $25,000 into the book, and I invested probably another $8,000 into like the media stuff.
That's good.
So
man.
really, it's the equivalent of buying a car.
Yeah.
Then, but it was also one of those decisions. I was kind of talking to my aunt about it, and I talked about it to some other people, and they were like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I had already pressed the button. I'm like, I'm going to talk to him. We had scheduled a meeting. And I think it was going to be like a couple days later. And before they even called me, I was looking at everything. I'm like, I was already ready to say yes. And so, because I had already built this, I'm like, I'm not going to stop here. Like, we're going all the way. So I ended up doing that. So it is a lot. It is very rewarding. Regardless if the book, makes money or if it gets popular or anything like that. And there's been things that have been going really well with it already. Like, it's received like 4 additional awards. On the first week of Amazon, it hit like #1 for like a couple days. Obviously, we didn't stay there for too long. But so all the signs are there to where it's like, it's doing a good job. It just has to get to like the right audience at this point. But it's like, even if I stop here, like even if, the book doesn't go anywhere, it's like, I've come onto like 20 different podcasts, and let's say there's like 100 people who listen to each podcast. Well, that's a couple thousand people that I might have just helped, regardless if it makes money or not.
Yeah, I mean, and you spent your money in worse places in your life, right?
I'd probably spend up where $5,000 to $10,000, probably somewhere in all the blackmailing.
Yeah, like I could put it in this place, and it's you have something from your life that exists for. I mean, a podcast episode alone is something that exists forever, right? But now you got a book exists forever. A couple like just like in action questions. Where'd you physically write most of this? Like, do you got like whether that's one place, or do you find like a certain place everywhere you go? Is it a safe place, a creative place? Like the Obamas, like Barack, he got like the hole, right? They got the thing that like Michelle calls the hole, where he goes and like reads books. And then when he wrote his book about his dad, he went away to like some cabin or something like that. For you to write this book, or like the book that you're working on now, because I know you're working on another book, when you lock in, is it a special place that you go to?
Not really. So, when I wrote this book, I was in Kuwait. I literally did it in the same office where I was writing contracts for the soldiers.
Okay.
So I had a relatively big office, because I took the place for my senior. So our senior couldn't come to the deployment with us. So I kind of got the senior's office to where it's like you could fit like 2 or 3 people in there, but I kind of had it all to myself, because I was also covering down for like the brigade meetings and stuff like that. And then I also had like the biggest battalion in the brigade. So I had the most people, coming to like the office and stuff like that. And so I kind of had to have like, a space to where like everyone could go to. And so, I would pretty much sit in that office. I had the keys to the office, and, when I wasn't working, I would close the door. Actually, normally I think I actually kept the door open just in case soldiers came like in my off hours, and I would just swap out the laptops. And so I would like have my work laptop off to the left, and I would have my, writing laptop off to the right side. And I just sat in that office and I wrote the entirety of that book. And then when it came to like the last 100 pages, the other counselors had just taken over my office. So I just went in an office like that was, I just went into the printing room and I just sat there for like 5 hours a day, jamming out like, 10 pages a day. So I can pretty much write anywhere, just as long as, but I do like to be, like alone with my own thoughts. But that's probably like the only stipulation, is just like be there alone, writing all the thoughts and then going from there.
Yeah, I was gonna. Okay, bro.
Well, I got one. I know. I'll let you go. It's a question about flow, right? As a creative. I grew up making music and stuff like that. I know that you also have a YouTube page now, so and that comes with some creativity as well. Did you ever feel overcome by like the flow of just the creative juices where like you were out of your control? So for instance, when I was in high school and I was making music, I worked at Wendy's, right? So and if somebody asking me for a spicy chicken and I'm like, some lyrics pop in my head, I'm like, hold up, I need a napkin. Like I got these, like and I mean, I think that's some more God particles too, but did you ever go through that?
Oh, absolutely. And I knew that I was kind of like going through this because, at the time when I was listening to Jordan Peterson, I think he even talked about it to where it's like he would have to go to the gym just to get his mind off of like the book, because like when you're actually creating the book and you actually sit down and like, this is something I want to do, like there's literally like hundreds of thoughts that are going through your head. And I've always had a hard time sleeping, and like this book would keep me awake like every night because I'm like, okay, what's going to be the next chapter? What's going to be the next sentence, the next quote, what's going to be in the next lesson? And so that is a really hard thing to actually go through mentally. And I recognize it, anytime I write, to where it's like you have to write it kind of like in the moment. I'm a very in the moment writer, and that's what you see with like all the subsections. It's like I wrote those like as they came to me, and like some of them would come to me in the gym to where I would write a quote, and then I would go back and I would write, I would turn it into like a couple paragraphs or like a story. And I've noticed like if I don't write it down there are some times where that quote will go away entirely. I don't remember the entire thought. So it's like, and my phone, I still have like the original notes to where I was writing the first one, and I have like a notes section for like the new one as well now. And so, it definitely overwhelms the brain, and you kind of have to try to turn it off as best you can. But I have always had a very active brain. My brain never really shuts down. So it's kind of like something I'm kind of used to by now.
Yeah, it's a book called, and I promise I'm gonna shut up, Aaron. It's a book called The Creative Act by Rick Rubin that breaks all of this down, like especially for the listeners. And then your guy too, Aaron, the guy who you put me on, who did the podcast and wrote the book. He does a great job explaining like just creativity, writing, and all those things. I forgot his older guy. The guy who you like, your favorite author, like.
Oh yeah, Pressfield. I'm gonna reference him again.
Yeah, Stephen Pressfield. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say to your point, right, Odama, you said about how you have the idea and you have to capture on the napkin. Same thing for you, Devin. Remy Adeleke, prior Navy SEAL, prior corpsman. He's written a book, Transformed, about him navigating his faith as he separated, from the military. He was on Jack Carr's podcast, Jack Carr, who's written the Terminal List series. And what he said is he kind of like a virtual commonplace book. He would just constantly throw his streams of thought in his phone, in his notes. And over the course of years, that's how he wrote his memoir. And then he wrote his fiction, talking about, it was like a thriller. That's how he captured it, right? So the act of a commonplace book. I was talking to a chief of my mess, a friend of mine, and we were talking about different types of journaling and capturing ideas. So I told her, I'm constantly writing things down. I put it in my phone. When I was doing long commutes, I would be doing the act of just capturing voice memos the same way. Even though I'm not like a lyricist, but as a thinker, as a writer, I would capture my ideas that way. That was the one thing. The second thing is, speaking about where you go to be in a physical place to create. Pressfield, he wrote, the name of the book is Put Your Ass Where Your Heart Wants to Be. It's funny, right? But he referenced Anne Rice. And Anne Rice, who wrote Interview with a Vampire and Lestat and was a Queen of the Damned and all that. If you look at her characters, they're always based out of New Orleans.
Yeah.
And she's not from New Orleans, but she knew that if she had to write, she had to physically put her physical body in New Orleans to create. I know, hip hop, right? But down on that, we talk hip hop, self-professed hip hop historians. Like DJ Premier is one of my favorite producers.
Yeah.
Right. He would, when he used to have it, he had to go into D&D studios
Yeah.
And certain artists would go there with Outkast, Goody Mob, and I forgot the name of that collective, but they will go to whatever studio in Georgia, Organized Noise. That's name the collective, but they had a certain studio they had to go to, and that's where their creative juices happen. So there is something as a creative, as a writer, where you might have your place. You know, for me, I was going to a library, or I had to get up at a certain time and sit right here or in my dining room to write. If I don't do it, I get these weird blocks and it's not going to flow. So there's something to really capturing that area where you know your creativity is channeled physically.
Dungeon Family. I just want to say Dungeon
Thank you.
Family. I had to for the sake of hip hop.
Got to. Yes. Thank you. The Dungeon Family and that production team, the Organized Noise, right? They had to go to whatever the name of that studio was, and that's where they really cranked out AT Aliens and what's other Goody Mob? Well, sorry, Soul Food, all that. So
So I was going to say, to add on to that real quick, I think one of the benefits about being in Kuwait as well, it's like there's nothing there but besides a desert. So it's like you're going to have to find something to fill your time. I'm like, okay, let me go take a couple 100 hours and write this book. But at the same time, and also there were certain sections in the book. I think one of them was called like the sandstorm, where I talked about, going through the sandstorm, which also, went into like a nice quote about like, and then, I mean, even it could have been, you could say it a coincidence, but, I was also in the Middle East. So, maybe that's also what kind of like led to Christianity as well, being thrown into the wilderness itself. But at the others, but there's multiple sections to where I started to learn to take beauty even in like the 100-degree days, to where I would just like sit and I would just take in the sun, and I like, this is really good. And I used to go on for about like an hour or two walk every night when I was there. I think I was getting like 12 to 15,000 steps in like a day. So I was doing pretty well out there. And, even that would help me as well, because I would, again, go meditate on it, get new thoughts just from doing the walking, and, just sitting down and appreciating everything. Even, if I'm suffering like in heat, I found I was able to find like some appreciation into it.
I know Ryan Holiday, he runs, and I'm doing a run challenge right now. And I remember 2 years ago, I was doing the same challenge. I was running more, and I looked at on my Substack, I had a flow state where I saw chronologically, if so the record, timeline wise, when I was the most active and more disciplined in my running, going back to the discipline part, that's when my writing also mirrored that level of consistency.
Yeah, All of those things go hand in hand. You eat better, you run better, you exercise better, you live better, life is better, your days are better, you're more positive. All of those things go hand in hand. Like, you know what I mean? And so while you're writing this book, right, a couple more book questions, and then I got some like we could close out kind of questions. But as you're writing this book, I look at it like, y'all ever saw Quantum Leap?
Yeah, Scott Bakula. We're a little older. Devin.
Devin might not have seen Quantum Leap, but it's out now.
It sounds familiar.
I'll get quick. So Quantum Leap, dude, he time jumps.
I'm gonna try.
He
gotta go too deep. Please don't go too deep.
He time jumps and he gets on people's bodies and he's living their experience. And it's just cool. All right, cool.
So and this ain't even really directly Quantum Leap, I guess, but this might be more Butterfly. I don't know. So, but as you're revisiting your memories, right? And because in order to write this book, you got to take yourself back to some places that you haven't been in a while, with the added, like, I've changed who I am. I recreated myself and I'm this person, this new person. But now you got to take this new person back to this old person. And kind of see yourself, right? And when you do that, and you kind of answered some of this a little bit when you was like, some of that dude, I still don't like, but when you do that and like a lot of these different predicaments, like how are you seeing yourself? Are you looking at yourself with like empathy for your younger self? Are you judging yourself? Like, just how do you see yourself?
I think that's one of the answers that kind of like changes, depending on the day and depending on where I'm going with right now. I think one of the, I think I quoted it was in chapter 4 where I'm like, I had to drag my mind back into the hell because, you know, I can't just write from like this optimistic experience, right? And then deprive everyone of the story. And that's why I included the thing about when I went to the prostitute, when I got a comedian, why I made that scene so graphic is like, I have to make this real for the audience. Yeah. And so I guess one of the big things, what I did when I was writing this book is like, okay, if I had to go back and do it all again, what would I write to myself, like coming out of that hospital? Or what book would I give myself if I had to do everything over again? And that's kind of like the experience. Because originally when I wrote this book, it was pretty much, it wasn't, you know, the faith wasn't there yet, or, you know, some of these other things weren't there yet, but it was like, what would I give myself coming out of that hospital, and what tips could I leave behind for other people going through that exact same experience right now? And, you know, that's kind of why I kind of like the, you know, little toolkit style of what I did with the book, to where there's like 100 different, you know, ways that you can go about this.
Yeah.
And so I would say, if I were to look back on my character right now, I would say maybe it was a little bit of empathy, just because I kind of like observed my background, but there's also, you know, some of these things I couldn't really avoid it, and I kind of just got thrown into a lot of them. So it's like, no wonder, you know, that I was very anti-religious at the start. You know, if you look at the full story and you look at all the proceedings, it's like, no, anyone's at that point, you know, going through all these events is going to come to the conclusion of like some form of like self-hatred or suicidal ideation. So, yeah, you know, I kind of give myself a little bit of a break, but at the same time, I also I'm not too empathetic, because I'm like, again, you know, you pointed out to where it's like, I do hate that character, and I'm very cautious of ever going back to who I was, just because of that, just because I can remember some of these things that I was doing, and some of these desperate situations, or the attitudes I had, or, you know, how I viewed society. And I'm like, I'd never want to go back to that, and I wouldn't wish that upon my worst enemy.
Yeah. Yeah. Who's the target for this book? Like, who's the ideal reader?
I mean, there were so many topics in the book that it's like anyone can kind of pick this book up and get something out of it. So whether like you're in the middle of like creating your character, whether you're at the hospital, whether your mother just died, you know, whether you're struggling with fakes, and, you know, that was one of the things about the book. It really can be about anyone. It's really, I would say, anyone who's looking to like restart life and like give life a second chance. That's probably who the book would be for. Whether it's like, you know, you're trying to go back to your faith, whether it's like you're trying to rebuild yourself, or like overcoming or trying to learn from like some of these situations, to where, you know, we view it as suffering, but it's like, okay, you know, how can I use this suffering, and how can I help the next person down the line?
Yeah. And for the listeners, y'all need to buy this book, right? I'm about to ask Devin where y'all can find it. Y'all need to get the book, because if y'all get the book, Devin will see that it's a market for the book, and it'll make him do the audiobook. Devin's an audiobook guy. He is. I know it. I know Devin's an audiobook guy. I'm an audiobook guy. Devin does his audiobook. I listen. I bought your book. I have your book, but Devin does the audiobook. I listen to the entire audiobook, and I got another audiobook under my sleeves. But y'all gotta let Devin know that it's worth it, because he done spent over $30,000 already writing his book. So let's give him some motivation, and like, so he could do that audiobook so we could listen to it. And so for the book, right? And we're not done, but I want to kind of make everybody kind of foot stomp with this book. For your book, where can people find it? And then also just where else can people find you on social media? I know, like I said, YouTube, and where else can people find you?
Yeah. So where they can find the book itself, you could pretty much find it lost words right there. Got a little confused. But you could pretty much find the book in any online store. So you could find it like on Amazon. You can find it on like Barnes & Noble online. I don't know if it's in any physical stores yet. I haven't seen it yet, but I don't have too many bookstores around here. But you can find it on ebook. You can get it on paperback. You can also get it on like hardcover. So it's in the 3 different variants. You can get it like on Kindle, Kodobo. So pretty much anywhere there are online books, this will get distributed. And then I was going to say, you did point it out. I just haven't done the audiobook yet, just because I have to figure out like the audience, figure it out, because that's like another 6,000 or 7,000 just to invest in that. Because we went over it at the beginning. I was like, hold up, maybe I'll put a pause on the brakes right here. I've already.
They're like, hey, do you want the heads up display? Nah, I don't need the heads up display. I'm good.
Yeah. So, and I guess one of the things I wanted to do is like, if I were to do a audiobook, it would pretty much be kind of like Can't Hurt Me, to where you also get like some of the commentary of like actually reading it. That was really what wanted me to want to do an audiobook. It's just, like waiting for everything to match out so far. And because I do know it sells better on ebook so far. But I would say the only bad part about getting it on ebook, in my opinion, is that you lose the part to where you can actually, continue to write the story on paper, because it does have a journal that you can participate with the book, as you're reading it as well. So I do recommend it like on paperback for that reason.
And then the socials, man. Hold on real quick. Socials, right? Where can they find you? Socials and like where?
Yep. So you can find me. So you can find me on Facebook. That's the only one I have right now, just because I got swarmed with like bot influencers on my other account, so I had to shut the other ones down. Yeah. Like on like Instagram, and my threads got like swarmed with like a bunch of bots, and so still fighting the scammers to this day. But yeah, you can find me on Facebook. So my name is Devin Fish. I'm very easy to find. And then also has like a cover of my book in the background. It is a public account, so anyone can message me. Anyone can, add me there if they have like any questions or want to talk about like one of the topics. Or, if you have a podcast of your own and you want to talk about it further there, we can talk about it there. As far as my YouTube channel, it is also called Answering the Hard Questions. You're not going to find too much about the actual book there, just because I'm kind of going into a new direction to where it is more of a reflection of what I'm currently doing, which is I'm focusing on my faith, Christianity, and some of the other projects I have coming up. So like next week, I'm going to be like on the road, and I'm going to be going to like unknown destinations. I'm going to be, probably talking to people at the churches, trying to learn the faith, kind of going back to like some of the old traditional ways of the Bible. And I'm trying to like relive some of those traditions rather than, just reading the Bible. So that's the next project I'm working on. Again, I still write every day, to where I'm like 120 pages into another book already that continues right when this last book came out. So I'm using YouTube as a audio recording for people who want to follow along, and then eventually that will all get turned into a book, just like how I did with Answering the Hard Questions. I already have like a couple hundred entries to where I could make the book right now. It's just, how long do I want to make it, and when's a good time to release it. But yeah, so those are two places they can find me.
Yeah. And the new book is also called Answering Something, right? You kind of got the title already, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the title that I want it to be is Answering the Call, a continuation of faith and questioning. Because it is going to be more focused, on faith. And then one of the big concepts was that, okay, I looked at Answering the Hard Questions after I became like a Christian, after I read the Bible. I'm like, okay, I got a lot of things wrong. And I almost took out like a couple sections of the book just because, I was feeling like that conviction at some level. But I'm like, nope, I already wrote it. I'm not going to try to erase my history. I'm just going to own up to it in the future when I write this next one. And then, so now it's like, okay, what can I take from my first book and what can I bring that to my faith? And then, so reconciling with some of those ideas. And then it's also, looking back on where, some of the history of, where I got caught up in the blackmailing, but I also look back at my history to where I was also like, I was introduced to pornography like when I was like 10 or 13. So I think that's where, that started to develop. And I actually talk about that in this book. So there's a graphic scene in the next book as well, to where I don't, sway away from like my brutal honesty like I did from the first book, just because I'm, going towards the faith now. But I'm still going to be, brutally honest of what I'm thinking about, what I'm going through in life.
Yeah. I mean, it's a part of the story. I heard you say before, right? You mentioned a term, and you kind of talked about a little bit. You said the term here, but you mentioned it was a phrase. You said consequences of self-hatred, right? Somebody was asking you if you could remember good moments in your past, and you said you couldn't because maybe these are the consequences of self-hatred. And I wanted to know from you, like outside of like not being able to remember good moments in your life, are there any other consequences of self-hatred that you could personally pinpoint?
I think probably the biggest consequence of self-hatred is that I'm always going to have an element of where I know I'm going to be too hard on myself. And so that's a very hard balancing act to where it's like, okay, am I being disciplined? Am I being too hard on myself? Can I give myself grace here? But there's also that line to where it's like, I recognize my habits to where I also get lazy. So it's like, kind of like drawing that line is very hard. But it's also, when you kind of like look back at yourself and like, if you really get to that stage of self-hatred, it's like you see like a completely, I guess, different person to who you actually are.
Mhm.
And I think, the benefit of that is like, okay, if I truly hated myself, now I got a reason not to go back. So that is one of the pros of self-hatred is like you get to like this point to where it's like, okay, I never want to go back to being that person.
Yeah.
And I think I would say one of the difficulties that, maybe self-hatred and, self-love and self-discovery, that was one of the things that was really hard to reconcile when I came back to Christianity. Because in some form, you have to, in some form, like you have to hate some of the things you do. And so that was like, I kind of almost had to go back to that. And that was kind of one of my struggles, coming back to faith as well.
Yeah.
So that's another one of those consequences where it's like, you don't want to go back to those like old feelings again, but you have to, in order to progress in faith.
Yeah. What are you still working on? Like in yourself,
Mhm.
like not the million things you're still working on, but what
Mhm.
are like, what's the biggest thing that you're still working on about yourself that you're still kind of struggling with?
If I were to pull something from scripture, is not to lean on my own understanding. So I tend to have that personality a lot because, I wrote a self-help book, I wrote a memoir. So I have to, kind of like separate that with my faith. It's like, okay, and that's the purpose of this next one is to, work out some of those thoughts and then, but it's also, figuring out what are not my thoughts, some of the stuff like that to where it's like, again, I talked about, the background of lust. And one of the consequences of lust is like that stuff never goes away. Even if like you overcome it with like your body or you get away from it, like those thoughts like always will pop back in your head. Same thing with the self-hatred to where it's like some of those suicidal thoughts will always pop back in my head, but I'm like, hey, that's a lie. And you have to learn how to kind of move on from some of those moments.
Yeah.
And so really it's just like continuing to seek the truth is like the biggest thing I'm always working on.
Yeah. Is author like it for you, or would you ever consider being a coach or a counselor?
I already got a little bit of experience in, the counseling, I guess,
Uh-huh.
completely different kind of counseling when it comes to like careers and like army stuff and all that. I'm kind of open to wherever this is going to take me. So it's like, if people want me to write more books, I'll continue to write more books. If they want, more YouTube, then I'll do more YouTube. If people want me to do like, come and do speeches, then I can come and do speeches. I've dabbled in a little bit of everything to where it's like I'm versatile, but I'm also open to, going wherever I'm pulled as long as, it's a good direction.
Yeah. I got 3 more questions. I kind of want to see what Aaron got before I ask my last 3.
Well, going back to the plug as Damos for as far as Devin, you doing the audio book, right? Damo's more of an audio guy. I like whatever. I'll do audio and I'll do the physical. A lot of people do an immersion reading, where a lot of times you could buy it and you get 2 for 1, where you get the audio and the electronic, and you can go cycle back and forth and like on Goggins. And we're not giving David Goggins no more press today on this pod, but but unless he comes on here. But I know in his books, his audio, he gave like little interviews in between chapters to incentivize getting audio. So maybe with audio, it kind of gives a chance to revisit some things and expound upon some chapters. As far as another reason to do that. The second thing I had was, it was a book recommendation. The main book recommendation is your book for this episode, I believe. But I got a pick of the week. I don't know if I can squeeze it in now, Damo, or later.
Pause, but yes, for sure.
Pause.
Yeah, squeeze it in. Squeeze it in, bro.
I'll make room for it. All right. So I got a pick of the week recommendation, and it's for you, Devin, from Stephen Pressfield, my favorite author. Name of the book is A Man at Arms. So it's kind of like the mercenary genre. So if you liked to watch the movie True Grit, A Man on Fire, The Professional, or your Jimbo or Logan, it's that genre where you got the hardened mercenary and, you know, he's like, leave me alone. And then you have like the child, you know, character that kind of softens him. He kind of saves him, right? So Man at Arms, it's a book about, he had this Roman legionary who's a mercenary who he gets hired to find these folks who have the letter of Paul to the Romans. So he takes the contract and then he finds them. And as he's doing his journey, he starts to navigate his path as a former soldier and now as a mercenary for hire. And then how he's starting to figure out his own faith and how at the end of the book, you kind of see what happens with him as he figures out his faith. So I think it's a great way. There's certain stories you tell about fiction that you can't tell through nonfiction. So A Man at Arms by Stephen Pressfield, he'll tell you his favorite character to write, Telemon, the mercenary. So Man at Arms, now a long read. The audio is real good. It's a real good narrator. So yeah, Man at Arms by Stephen Pressfield. That's my recommendation to you. Maybe you do your own fiction book as in chapter 3, and my recommendation for this episode.
Sound like Book of Eli, man.
Yeah, minus the kid. Yeah, but his own choice. You get the loner, that type. I don't know what type of genre that is. If it's mercenary, the grizzled vet type of archetype. Yeah, but like I said, it's kind of like True Grit, A Man on Fire, The Professional. That type of character, man. I enjoyed it. I read it twice because he recently published another book with that character, man.
All right, so my last 3 right here, man. Let's make these count. I'm going to try to make these count. If 18-year-old Devin walked through the door, right, what would he think of the man sitting where you are right now?
I don't think he would recognize me anymore. Because if we rewound a year ago and you told me I was going to be a Christian, I was like, you're still crazy. Yeah. So that would definitely catch us off guard. The fact that, you know, I kind of turned my life around and that I don't hate myself anymore, I think that's the biggest thing he would probably notice. He's like, okay, maybe life's not over just yet. Yeah.
Yeah. If somebody's like just watching this podcast or listening to it and they hate themselves the way you once hated yourself, what would you want them to hear from someone who's been there before?
So I guess one of my favorite quotes that I say in the book is, "In truth, you will find redemption." Typically, you know, when you hate yourself, it's some form of lie that we continue to tell ourselves in the silence, which is what ends up getting ourselves killed. But the other part is that we do have to be like accountable for some of the things we do. Like I talk about the blackmail and I'm like, I don't condone this at all, but it's like, I'm not going to hide my history because it can help someone else. So I would say, you know, take whatever you're going through right now and ask yourself, how can I help someone else by, you know, turning my life around or doing something in that kind of form.
Yeah. And what would you tell the version of Devin that didn't think he'd make it this far?
You know, I talk about this. I think I talk about this very briefly in the book, that if I had to tell myself anything, if I can go back in time, I would be like, I wouldn't tell him anything and I would let him figure it out for himself. Because I know me, I'm stubborn. I also have a lot of resilience, so it takes a lot for me to change. So I acknowledge that I had to go through each one of those situations to become the person I am today.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, Devin Fish, man. Hey, so I'll let that happen for a second. I'll let that happen. Hey, man, thanks for coming, hanging out with us, right? I know that when people release books and stuff, they go on like, you know, podcast runs, and some of them things last 40 minutes. Some of them things last an hour. Hanging out with us, you've been out here with us for like 2.5 hours. I appreciate it. I appreciate your story. I appreciate the honesty. I appreciate the candidness. I appreciate that in the book and on the podcast. I wish you all the luck in the world with your book and all the luck in the world with your personal journey and your personal growth. And I hope you was able to have a little bit of a good time with us for the last 2.5 hours, man. So thanks, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. And absolutely, I enjoyed the conversation. I think this is probably the longest one we've done, but it also flowed really well. And, we got to go over a lot of content of the actual book itself. And, we had got a lot of good questions and answers too.
Yeah. Peace out.